Sami Hamdi, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to our studio in London.
Wa alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for having me.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you for joining us. And we're back in London, Sami. So any trips coming up for you?
Alhamdulillah, I think I'm going on the road again soon.
California anytime soon?
California, not anytime soon. I'll take a break a bit from the US while things go a bit wild over there.
Yeah.
Well, they're kidnapping presidents now from different countries and the like. Although there was a very interesting meme, just to start a bit lightly before getting to the deeper stuff. I saw this meme of a picture. It said, so they go in, they grab Maduro from Venezuela, they bring him to the US, ICE detains Maduro and deports him back to Venezuela. So, it'd be interesting to see what ICE does with Maduro in New York. But jokes aside,
Yeah.
it's, alhamdulillah, inshallah, on the road again. I had a good break and we'll see where it goes.
Barakallah fiqh. Well, let's talk about that subject of Maduro, right? Because it's extraordinary. President Maduro, president of Venezuela, of course, was kidnapped by a US force and brought back to New York, where he's now going to stand trial for ostensibly drugs charges. From your perspective, what does this episode tell us about American foreign policy in general under Donald Trump?
What's worth noting is that this is not the first time that the US has done this. And I think sometimes when that question is posed, it's almost as if there is a shock and surprise that the US is going in and imposing regime change as if it is something new in American foreign policy that it hasn't been doing since 1940s, 1950s across the entire world and the like. In fact, in Venezuela itself, you remember, for example, that they kidnapped Chavez, who was the president beforehand, and then people took to the streets and they were forced to bring Chavez back, something that's not happening with Maduro in this case, because I think Maduro domestically didn't have that particular support. Even those who are opposed to what happened to Maduro are not doing it because they like Maduro. It's more about this idea of how do you hold on to this principle and the like. But I think that if we're looking at it in terms of geopolitics, I think that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, I think he epitomized the US view towards why they did what they did, which is that they're looking at this world now with this increasing competition from China and from the Russians. And Russia and China geographically may be far away, but Venezuela is very close. Venezuela has immense oil reserves, probably the biggest in the world. And there is a concern, particularly in Washington, and this isn't a Trump administration concern. This is also a Biden administration concern, an Obama administration concern, and Trump version 1 and beforehand as well. This idea that China and Russia cannot be allowed to play in the backyard of what Americans consider to be their own backyard. And this isn't something even recent. The Bay of Pigs, with the Russians in Cuba and the like, shows you the extent that the Americans were willing to go to ensure that none of these Latin American states fall within the orbit of China and of Russia. So if you look at what, for example, Kennedy did once upon a time, sending in troops towards Cuba, the point that I'm saying is this isn't a Trump phenomenon that we're seeing in terms of kidnapping Maduro and perhaps bringing him to New York and putting him on trial in New York, the sort of, the Apprentice style sitcom or the like. Perhaps that is particularly new. But certainly, I don't think it's a knee-jerk reaction from the Trump administration. Moreover, you'll remember that the bounty that was put on Maduro, the bounty indicating that there is a multi-million-dollar reward for anybody who catches Maduro, was not announced under the Trump administration first. The Biden administration already had a bounty out for Maduro, suggesting that the Biden administration already had this idea of, we need to get rid of the Maduro administration, we need to get rid of Maduro himself, we need to find a way to capture him, and there is a reward for anybody who brings Maduro. So in many ways, I'm wary of the premise of why did Trump do this, and I prefer to put it back within the correct framework, which is, why has America done it again? And America has done it again because America is doing what it always does whenever it feels the heat of that geopolitical competition, whereby now it feels like it's no longer the sole hegemon. It's seeing China start to rise. It's seeing Russia start to rise. And there's a concern amongst the Americans about how do we compete with the Chinese and the Russians in that regard, particularly given from Trump administration's perspective, that Europe is not a reliable ally. Europe don't pay on their military expenditure. Europe is not contributing enough. Europe is not contributing enough to NATO, and they're not contributing enough with regards to Ukraine. There's a sense in the Washington administration that America needs to reassert itself in a world where people are now doubting American power because of the rise of the dragon and the rise of the bear, or call them whatever it is that you wish. That's not saying that what Trump did is justified or legitimate. But I do think that the idea that somehow that the facade of this rules-based order collapsed as a result of what happened to Maduro. It collapsed on the Iraq War, it collapsed in Afghanistan, it collapsed in Operation Desert Storm, it collapsed in in Bosnia. It collapsed in all these other different various wars. I'm very wary of the arrogance of assuming that our lifetime somehow is the beginning and the end of all of history. Trump has done nothing strange with regards to American foreign policy, and Europe is doing nothing strange in the way that it refuses to condemn what Donald Trump has done. And now the problem for Europe is that now that you've allowed Maduro to be captured in this manner and taken, and there are suggestions perhaps that Maduro had become so unpopular that this was enabled by some members of the Maduro regime who basically said to Donald Trump, don't punish the regime, take Maduro. And then, because there is a very interesting story. When Chavez was kidnapped, there wasn't much bloodshed when Chavez was kidnapped. So many people said, why? What happened? And the reports from inside indicate that Chavez actually told his team to stand down in order to avoid that bloodshed, and basically said, I can get myself back in a different way. It's possible Maduro said, listen, I don't want that particular bloodshed. Keep the regime intact. I'll go to New York and see how you guys deal with things. And the irony is this, that Trump, perhaps what is new about what Trump did, if we really want to talk about what does it say about the new, is that Trump is very unprecedentedly honest as a US president, as far as US presidents are concerned, about why he's doing it. I mean, you think about the Iraq war, it was about saving the Iraqis from Saddam Hussein. Trump doesn't even play with this idea of saving Venezuelans. He goes, we gotta go in, we gotta get the oil, you know, it's all being very blunt about what he wants. We're taking control of it, the way they took control of Iraq and the way they took control of Afghanistan. We're bringing in American companies to benefit, they're gonna make a lot of money. And he's saying it bluntly, the same way they did in Iraq, the same way they did in... Trump is removing the pretense, and that's making the Western states uncomfortable, because when this was done before, they all agreed to pretend it was about international law. Trump doesn't even afford them the visage or the facade of being able to say it's international law. Okay. If Trump had said we're going in to rescue the Venezuelan people, then Keir Starmer, when he's interviewed by Laura Kunzberg and these others, he could have said we're there to rescue the Venezuelan people. The problem is, because he says it's about oil, Keir Starmer now is stuck because he can't say yes, we're with the Americans, because Trump has said we're going to exploit another country and we're going to colonize it. And he can't say that we're against it because Donald Trump will punish him and impose higher tariffs on the United Kingdom. So I think in this regard, certainly it's new. But the final point I'll make on this, is that what happened to Maduro doesn't just affect the US and Europe. Israel will be watching to see if this can be done to Ahmed al-Shara in Syria. China will be watching to see if it's something it can do in Taiwan. Russia will be seeing if it's something it can do in Kiev, particularly given that Trump wants that peace. Because now that there's nobody even pretending, forget they weren't upholding it before, now that there's no one even pretending that international law exists, there's nothing stopping Trump going to take Greenland. There's nothing stopping people now seizing different territories and arguing that if Trump did it so publicly for the reasons that he stated, then we can do it too. And that's what I think the danger is now, in that now that Trump has abandoned the pretense of international and gone for hard power and is going to get away with it, then I think there are many people very eager to deploy that hard power. And now everything is gloves off.
Okay, you say we shouldn't build Trump as an exception here. But of course, you and I have spoken over the last year or so about MAGA and the MAGA movement, the America First movement. And the whole idea behind MAGA was to not be interventionist, to focus on domestic policy, to not focus on international policy, on foreign policy. What we see in here is almost a betrayal of those MAGA principles, it seems. And in fact, some of the right-wing commentators like Tucker Carlson, like Candace Owen, have framed it in that way. This is a betrayal of our fundamental principles of why we elected Trump in the first place. I mean, shouldn't we, in a way, wouldn't we have seen Trump to be an exception here? Yet Trump has turned out to be as interventionist as the neocons and all of the other Democrats and Republican politicians that have served the United States since World War II.
I think there are distinct differences between Trump's interventionism and those of the past. Even if the general framework seems to be exactly the same, as I argued earlier, it is the same, but there's a distinct difference with regards to how Trump goes about it.
Yeah.
I think the first aspect is it's important to put into context the timing of Trump's intervention, his coup, his regime change, if you can even call it a regime change, in Venezuela.
Yeah.
The first is that he lost New York, he lost Virginia, and he lost number of elections. as a result of the economic crisis within America itself. He insists that the economy is doing well, but he will be acutely aware, as will his government, that the economic crisis in America is getting worse and he needs to deal with it. Otherwise, he's going to get smashed in the midterm elections. The polls do not look good for Donald Trump at all in those midterm elections.
Yeah.
In 2018, 2019, Donald Trump entered into a massive beef with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and with the Gulf states over the price of oil. Donald Trump's belief was that because they were bringing the price of oil up, it was affecting the economy in America and it was affecting the ordinary daily lives of ordinary Americans as a result of the cumulative and costs that were rising as a result. And therefore, he was asking for a lower oil price. The Saudi Crown Prince and the other Gulf states said absolutely not, because they were worried about shale oil at the time that Trump was investing in the hope that the US would be self-sufficient from the Americans. So when he asked for a cut in production, the Saudis refused to cut production and instead actually tried to flood the market with oil to force the price so low so it wouldn't be profitable for anybody, so that Trump would be forced into backtracking. And Trump eventually made the deal with the Saudis and said, okay, fine, you don't cut production, I'll cut production instead. Something that's illegal in the US, but he found a loophole in the anti-monopoly law that exists in America. The point being here is, Trump's conclusion in 2018 was, if I bring down the oil price, I solve much of the economic woes that are in America. I solve the gas prices that the Americans are complaining about, and therefore I lower delivery costs because gas prices are... He sees oil as the center of how that economy actually works. The point here being is, by taking control of Venezuela's oil, Donald Trump believes that he will be independent of the Saudis and the Gulf states. He'll be able to control that oil price, bring that oil price down before the midterm elections. People see a tangible change in the American economy. They say Donald Trump did it. I'm going to go and vote for Donald Trump. The second point here is that Donald Trump believes that his base will not tolerate a prolonged intervention. So Donald Trump agrees to a maneuver that doesn't involve any bloodshed of any American soldiers. No American soldier was killed in it. And it's very much like a shock and awe, very quick in and out. None of this business of staying in Iraq, none of this business of staying in Afghanistan. If it's going to be done, it has to be done in a way that maximizes the benefits of the Americans. And if I have to intervene, it has to be done in a way that's the least costly possible so that I can still claim to be an anti-interventionist. And I think Mearsheimer made a very similar point as well. I was watching one of his interviews where he made the point that Donald Trump's intervention is not like those before him, in the sense that he hates intervening and only intervenes when he's absolutely certain of the result and certain that he won't get bogged down into it. That's not to say that Trump is different from his predecessors, but it means that Trump's calculations are very different. Dick Cheney loved the idea of rebuilding the Iraqi state. Trump hates the idea of rebuilding Venezuela. Trump wants prices to go down in America so he can win the midterm elections, and he doesn't want to be bullied by international powers when it comes to the oil price, because he has no short-term solution for any of these economic problems. Yeah. And this is what brings me back to your point, even with regards to Greenland. One of the reasons that he wants a military base in Greenland, and again, this is not a justification for anything Trump is doing, rather it is to emphasize that there is a Trumpian logic to what he's doing. This isn't him just lashing out. Trump believes that if he can take over Greenland and establish a military presence over there, then the oil ships that tend to cross that Atlantic Ocean, that used to go from Venezuela to Iran, for example, or the Russian oil tankers and gas tankers, Trump will find it easier from Greenland to launch military operations to stop those oil tankers going to and fro, and he will be able to seize that oil and bring it and either ransom it or use it into America to also bring those prices down. It's piracy, basically, but essentially being done by the global superpower. The point is, there is a logic to what appears to be a madness. It's an illegal logic, certainly. It's wrong, certainly. But in the realms of geopolitics, there's a reason why Trump is doing it. And that's why I think that what Trump hopes is that with all of this stuff that he's done with Venezuela, by the time he gets to the midterm elections, he'll manage to bring the oil price and gas prices low enough to be able to temper the damage that he's expecting in the midterm elections, because he does not want to be a lame duck in the final 2 years. The final point worth mentioning here on this point is this. I don't think it's a coincidence that Netanyahu was with Donald Trump a couple of days before what happened to Maduro, because Netanyahu has openly stated that Venezuela is an open enemy. Venezuela has often been seen as a supporter of the Palestinian cause. Venezuela has been seen as a means through which there has been material support for the Palestinians, allegedly, according to what Netanyahu is saying. And Netanyahu, in the midst of the shift in public opinion, is trying to punish every single individual who has contributed to that shifting in public opinion, or who is deemed to be supporting those Palestinians, which is why I think it's ironic that Colombian president is also being threatened by Donald Trump. We see Netanyahu lobbying against Erdogan. We see Netanyahu lobbying in Europe against every pro-Palestinian organization. There's a sense, particularly on the part of Netanyahu, that in the midst of this popular perception that I'm getting weak, I need to smash everybody and let them know that Zionist power is supreme. And in the case of Maduro, he certainly made a point.
Today I am here, very honored to be here in County Wajir in Kenya. Baitul Mal has been involved in various projects, and one of the projects which we have been sponsoring about supplying the clean water to different villages in Wajir County. And as I see most of the families and children, they came here to collect this water, and looking at them, their smiling faces to get this precious commodity makes the Baitul Mal and its team very proud and happy. Thank you very much to be here.
Visit btml.us/thinkingmuslim to learn more and give.
What about Iran? I mean, at that press conference you talk about in Mar-a-Lago, there was a very assertive approach to Iran, and later on Donald Trump sent out the message on Truth Social that American military was armed and loaded, or locked and loaded, when it comes to safeguarding the so-called democratic or the anti-regime demonstrators in Tehran. What do you think the prospect, in the same vein that he has intervened in Latin America, do you feel that there is any prospect of Donald Trump invading or at least interfering in the domestic affairs of Iran?
I think that when it comes to Iran, the situation is a bit different with regards to Donald Trump. I think with Venezuela, it was easy and straightforward with regards to Maduro. And I think that when you look at Latin America generally, their ties with China are rapidly increasing. And I think Donald Trump is hoping that what he did to Maduro will scare Lula in Brazil, it will scare the Colombian president, it will scare Mexico into weaning their influence, weaning their dependency and their ties with regards to China. He's hoping that what he did with Maduro will have that chilling effect. With Iran, it's very different, primarily because when the Israelis went head-to-head with the Iranians, they couldn't survive on their own without American assistance. America had to spend a lot of money in order to help the Israelis out, in order to repair that Iron Dome. The cost of changing the regime in Iran is far more expensive than what they did with Maduro. Trump is not inclined towards an operation that requires the amount of investment that changing the regime in Iran is required. It's true that Pompeo indicated in a tweet that Mossad agents are walking on the streets of Iran right now, trying to support the protests that are taking place against that Iranian regime. But Iran is a very different, geographically, Iran is very different in terms of the relationship between the regime and its people. And Iran, there is another angle to it, which is that whereas maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and these states wanted to see a regime change in Iran, today Saudi doesn't want to see a regime change in Iran. Neither does Turkey, neither does Iraq, neither even does Syria want to see a regime change, because they are worried that the fallout from any regime change in Iran, that the Americans showed in Iraq and Afghanistan, that they don't have the capacity or capability to contain the fallout from a disintegration of Iran. Shara in Damascus is in no position to handle a fallout in Iran. Iraq is not in a position to handle a fallout with Iran. Saudi most definitely does not want another war on another front with regards to the Iranians themselves. I think that Donald Trump, when he hears all of these voices saying that this is too expensive, it's hard to imagine that he will take such initiative as he did against Maduro, against the Iranians themselves. And the other point worth mentioning here is, to quote the words of an analyst I like to follow called Mu'in Rabbani, he was asked once, how do we interpret Trump's policy from what he says? And he said Trump's policy is always based on the last person that he spoke to. So if he speaks to Netanyahu, he will say, I hate Iran. When he speaks to the Saudis who don't want war with Iran, he'll say Iran has agreed to make peace. It depends on who he's speaking to. And that's why I think the Iran statement is certainly bluff. And I think Trump is monitoring the reaction to what he did to Maduro and hoping that has the intended effect that won't require him to invest American resources in future, in terms of investing American resources in regime change that he doesn't want to get bogged down into, because Trump may see an economic need in securing the oil, but he's very wary that his base is starting to fracture. He's wary that his base are angry that he intervened. He's wary that his base don't understand it. He's wary that his base are debating the matter. You can see the Matt Walshes and Tucker Carlsons and these others debating why on earth did we get involved in Venezuela and the like. He doesn't want to exacerbate that. And this is what leads me to suggest that what Trump did was not something that was done off the cuff, but something that he felt he was pressed into by a geopolitical reality that he feels he needs to tackle, and he did it in a very Trumpian way.
So can I ask you about the Netanyahu-Trump press conference that took place, as I said, in Florida, in Mar-a-Lago? And I mean, many commentators suggested that there was a lot of consensus during that press conference, and, you know, there was a love-in basically between Trump and Netanyahu. But of course, there was some slight pushbacks, in particular over Turkey and that second phase, and whether there could be a Turkish force stationed somewhere in Gaza. And there was some conversation about the West Bank and settlement activity in the West Bank. And you can see the body language between the two was somewhat icy at that stage, because, you know, Trump said that Netanyahu was wrong on West Bank settlements. I mean, do you see that as a disalignment between the two sides? Or I spoke to Daniel Levy about this, and his argument was that, you know, it's really just, it's minor. It's a superficial disagreement. And on most issues, they are very firmly aligned. Like, how do you see that relationship, I suppose, between Trump and Netanyahu today?
There is generally a maxim in terms of political leadership. It's a funny story. We'll start with this just to change the pace a bit. Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was the president of Yemen, was once asked by a Tunisian journalist, why don't you visit Tunisia? You know, like to come from time to time. And Ali Abdullah Saleh famously said, because we have no problems with Tunisia. He said, when you see a president flying to see a president, it means there's a problem that cannot be resolved over the phone. So you need to get on a plane and go and see that person face to face in order to resolve it.
They've had 8 meetings, have they, in public or something?
In the space of a year, Netanyahu has been to the US about 7-8 times.
Yeah.
Netanyahu gets on a plane. Netanyahu's got a crisis domestically. He's got court cases. He has economic crisis. He has the war against the Palestinians, the genocide that he's committing in Gaza. He has the issues with regards to Syria and Suwaida. He has the issues with regards to Lebanon. He has the issues with regards to wrestling with Turkey. He has the issues with regards to Egyptian gas. He has the issues with regards to the Mediterranean. He has the issues with how to convince the Saudis to stay with normalization, given that bin Salman no longer sees much of a benefit in terms of officially normalizing. Netanyahu has all of these crises, but still finds times to get on a plane, to fly all those 15, 14 hours or however long it takes, to go and see Donald Trump for a few days, to sit with him, not to have a cup. They're not going for a cup of tea. They're not going to say, wallahi, not wallahi, but like they say, you know, oh, Donald Trump, you know, this is, I missed you so much. I wanted to sit in Malaga with you and your wife. Netanyahu is going because no matter how much he calls on the phone, Trump does not give him an answer that satisfied Netanyahu. And let's look about this particular situation. Firstly, you're talking about Gaza phase 2. It is true that Gaza phase 2 is being stalled because the Israelis are bombing the Palestinians. They are breaking the ceasefire. They are killing the Palestinians, albeit at a lower intensity than before the so-called ceasefire. But certainly the Israelis are trying to provoke the Palestinians into giving a reason for Europe and the Americans to say, we need to break the ceasefire. There's a reason why Hamas refused to come out and say, we're going back to war. Hamas know Israelis are trying to provoke them into an escalation whereby, and you remember the incident when Israelis claimed there was an explosion in Rafah. And so they said the ceasefire is broken and they bombed Gaza. And the Americans responded and said, what do you mean explosion? We know it was you that did it. And the Israelis had to go back to the ceasefire within 24 hours. The reason why I say this is that Gaza phase 2 is stalled because the Israelis are unsure if Trump will allow them to break the ceasefire. The reason it's stuck, of course, because the Americans aren't pushing phase 2, or rather they haven't. Trump is a bit distracted by Venezuela and by Russia and the like. But it's also stalled because Netanyahu is sitting in Tel Aviv saying, I don't know what Trump is going to allow me to do here. Am I allowed to break the ceasefire? Am I allowed to go back in? Am I allowed to go and colonize the rest of Gaza? Am I allowed to go back to genocide? Trump is not telling him, no, you can't. But Trump's not telling him, yes, you can. And that unpredictability is why Netanyahu keeps having to go to the White House and or go to Mar-a-Lago in particular. Remember, this time it wasn't the White House. Netanyahu went to Trump's retreat where Trump is relaxing because he said, I don't have time to wait until he gets back to the White House. Mr. Trump, please, I need to see you urgently. And Trump went to him, all right, fine, come to Mar-a-Lago and come and sit and let's talk. That's what's happening in these meetings. Netanyahu is saying to Donald Trump, what can I do? What can't I do? And Trump is giving him the same bluff in which there is no meaning in what he's saying. Yes, you do what you have to do. What does that mean? Can I go commit genocide? No, you have to uphold the ceasefire. But you said I can do what I have to do. Yet there is a confusion with regards to Netanyahu. Mr. President, Turkey is doing horrible things in Syria. I know there's a big terrorism problem over there. Exactly, but Erdogan is my friend. What do you mean Erdogan? How can you tell me on the one hand you have a problem, on the other hand you're telling me Erdogan? Netanyahu is just as confused as Erdogan is just as confused as you are, is just as confused as everybody else. So Netanyahu sits with Trump, trying to extract a promise. Mr. President, I need you to go to war with the Iranians. Yes, the Iranians are really bad. Give me a second, let me go on Truth Social, and let me write that Iran is such a bad country, and we're going to prepare to go and bomb the Iranians if they do this. Thank you, Mr. President. So when do we go to war? What war? Netanyahu is trying to work out what's happening here, which is why he gets on a plane and constantly flies. Think about it this way. Not only is Netanyahu flying to the US, but Netanyahu is flying over countries that are signatories to the ICC, who have an obligation to arrest him. Meaning, every time Netanyahu flies on those 8 trips, it's not like he's getting on a plane and saying, okay, guys, let's go and enjoy ourselves in Florida. He's saying, which countries can I fly over? One time he flies over France, the next day he can't fly over France. He flies over Greece and then suddenly he can't fly. This isn't easy for Netanyahu to get on a plane and go and meet with Donald Trump and to go and speak with him. He's doing it because Trump is not giving him the assurances that Biden gave him. Biden told Netanyahu, you do what you have to do and I will give you a blank check for it. Trump says that he has a blank check, but then does the complete opposite by forcing a ceasefire in Gaza and then saying Erdogan is my friend. Netanyahu doesn't know what to do with Donald Trump. In the words of a prominent Jewish anti-Zionist, I won't mention his name because I didn't get permission to mention his name, but many people follow him, followed by millions of people. We were sitting once in a room and he was asked, what is the difference between Biden and Trump on Palestine? And the question was asked as a dig towards me in particular. And the historian responded and said, under Biden, you always knew that he'd operate under the framework of what all American presidents did with Israel. What Israel wants, it does. With Trump, this is his words, not mine. He's so driven by his ego that even if Palestinians can't influence him, the Zionists also don't know what he's going to do either. And that uncertainty is what unsettles Netanyahu. And this is the point in that press conference. So they sit there, have a discussion about Iran. They have a discussion about Syria. Israel says, I need to kill Ahmad al-Shara. I need to get rid of him. Trump seems to have told Netanyahu something that Netanyahu wanted to hear, which is why Netanyahu agreed to the press conference. Then they get to the press conference and Trump gets asked a question by a journalist and he says, yeah, you know, with regards to the troops that are going into Gaza, you know, Turkey, Erdogan is a good friend of mine. You know, we can send Turkish troops in there. And Netanyahu's reaction was, that's not what you said to me in the private meeting. Why are you telling me one thing? I flew all the way here to make sense of what you're saying. You tell me one thing and then you go out in the press conference and say something else. And then you tell me all is going to be fine. What I'm saying is that in that press conference, we did not establish what Trump's policy is. We did not establish if he's going to phase 2, but we did not establish if he's given up on phase 2. We did not establish if Turkey is going to be part of the Gaza force or if Turkey is not going to be part of the Gaza force. Or we did not establish if Trump is going to go to war with the Iranians or if he's not going to go to war with the Iranians. Netanyahu flew 14 hours for clarity and got no clarity from Donald Trump when he flew back to Tel Aviv. And that's the double-edged sword with Donald Trump when it comes to the issue of Gaza or the issue of Syria. You don't know what mood Donald Trump is going to wake up with tomorrow. Biden, you knew that if Israel gets stuck, we can do a humanitarian corridor and help them ethnically cleanse northern Gaza. If Israel is stuck taking Gaza City, we'll send Marines through a humanitarian pier. Blinken will do the marketing for you. And Biden was very proactive in helping Israel with the genocide. With Donald Trump, it's, ooh, wow. Russia, please look this way, Mr. President. Oh, Venezuela. Oh, Gaza. Okay, phase 2. Yes, phase 2. But I like Erdogan. No, Erdogan. it's like trying to, get Trump's attention on something. Netanyahu is struggling to do so. This should not be taken as necessarily a positive or a negative, because it doesn't mean things are getting better. And it doesn't mean that the situation in Palestine is getting better. What it means is the Zionists no longer are having their way in the way they once did, which leaves room for Erdogan and now potentially Mohammed bin Salman, now that he's fallen out with Mohammed bin Zayed, to go to Donald Trump and present a plan that the Israelis don't like, but that says to Trump, I can solve this issue for you very quickly, just implement it and go ahead and do it. The same way that I imagine Maduro's underlings said to Donald Trump, when they said, Mr. President, we don't want war, we don't want to fight with America, you can take Maduro, leave the regime intact, and we'll make sure that the oil flows to the US. Because think about it this way, and I won't go on too long about it. Donald Trump captures Maduro, takes him from Caracas and takes him to New York. That Nobel Peace Prize winner, that Venezuelan who won it, the Venezuelan opposition leader, she thinks that this means that Trump is going to go and install her.
Yeah.
So she's getting ready and her party is getting ready and everybody's saying, right, is this regime change? Then Donald Trump gets asked on Air Force One, Mr. President, when is she coming to Caracas? And he says, I don't think we'll be bringing her there. She doesn't have any power, no influence. She's not even popular. Donald Trump is openly saying, I'm not handing over power to her. Then they say to Marco Rubio, so wait a minute, you didn't change the regime. You're going to be working with the Chavistas. And he says, we've spoken to them. And they're telling us that they're willing to work with us and willing to abide by our conditions. The implication here being is, Trump is not doing what anybody is expecting him to do. Trump essentially is, twisting and turning, and not even Netanyahu can make sense of what Trump is doing. What that means is, and I promise this is the point I finish on, in order to try to, if I had to summarize it in one sentence, we don't know what Trump is going to do tomorrow. But for the first time in a long time, neither do the Israelis. We don't know what Trump is going to do in Gaza tomorrow. But for the first time, neither do the Israelis. We don't know if Turkey is going to be able to save Gaza by sending in troops to prevent the Israelis from colonizing it. But for the first time, neither do the Israelis. This period of uncertainty that we're entering in is something that, if you're looking about it strictly from an amoral political perspective, is, as an analyst, you're thinking, this is perhaps better than the certainty of genocide that Biden kept promising in his support for Netanyahu.
I mean, Sami, that's really interesting. But of course, the popular perception on social media, but actually beyond that, through a number of analysts argue that, this President Trump, is as Zionist as the other presidents. I mean, you saw that Mark Levin, that the Zionist broadcaster who put his arm around Donald Trump and said, this is our first Jewish president. I mean, it looked pretty humiliating, at least that's the perception that was given. We've got Jared Kushner, of course, his son-in-law, who's very pro-Zionist, right? How do we square these public displays of support for Israel and what you say there, which is that, this is a more transactional president. He doesn't have ideology like obviously Joe Biden had.
Trump is not Zionist and he's not anti-Zionist. Trump receives $250 million from a Zionist lobby. And so he thanks them at a gathering and invites them to the White House. And they tell him, Mr. President, thank you for taking our money and supporting us. And, we've spoken to lawyers and we think you should have a third term as well. Mr. President, we know that the Qataris are whispering in your ear and telling you that they will give you hotels and that Eric Trump will get investments. Don't listen to the Qataris, Mr. President. Adelson can give you, more money than the Qataris can offer you, stick with us. And he says, I love you and I love the Qataris. No, but you love us more, don't you, Mr. President? Yes, of course, I love you more. Mr. President, we know that Erdogan, I get it. He stood with you when, they rigged the elections in, 2020 and, he remained your friend and he remained on good ties. But, Erdogan secretly dreams of being a sultan and taking over Jerusalem and the like. And Donald Trump says, but he does a really good job, of looking after Syria and, reducing American expenses in Syria. But Mr. President, we can cover the expenses. The Zionists can spend money to help you in it. Well, how much are we talking over here? Yeah, but I need to see. No, Mr. President, you love us even. That's the relationship. It's not that Trump, when I say Trump is a transactionist, it's who is the one lobbying with the greatest influence over Donald Trump. You think about it this way. The Zionists insisted that TikTok should be banned, and they got under the Biden administration They got the paper that says that TikTok needs to be banned. It just needed a signature of a US president. Biden lost the election, or Harris lost the election before that signature could be put on the paper. Donald Trump comes to power. The Zionists sit there and they say he's going to ban it. Yes, he's going to ban TikTok. He's going to ban the means through which Americans are seeing the truth of Palestine. He's going to allow us to hoodwink the Americans again. We're going to shut off the means through which Americans are realizing the reality of what's happening in Palestine. That's caused the Americans to go from being pro-Israel to pro-Palestine. Trump sits there, looks at the paper and says, you know what? I'm not signing it. When the Zionists tell him, why are you not signing it? We lobbied, we gave money, we supported. AIPAC had your back. We hosted parties for you. We hosted fundraisers. Donald Trump actually went to a press conference, and when they told him, Mr. President, why didn't you sign it? Just to give an indication of the kind of president Donald Trump is. Mr. President, why didn't you sign the bill banning TikTok? Donald Trump didn't say because I think it affects American national interest, because it, a foreign policy issue, freedom of speech. Donald Trump says, and you can find it, it's on Google, you can find it. He says, when I was about to sign it, my son Barron walked into the office and says to me, Dad, are you really going to ban TikTok? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, but why? It was so integral in helping you win the election. And I had never used TikTok before. My son Barron showed me how to use TikTok. And I realized it's actually a really cool product. I'm actually going to call the Chinese and say, let's go 50-50 on it. If you're a Zionist who spent $250 million on this man's campaign, and he refuses to ban TikTok, which is one of your main demands. Mitt Romney and Blinken sat in that conference, and Mitt Romney said that TikTok is becoming a problem, and Blinken said, which is why we're thinking of banning it, which is why we need to ban it, because according to Mitt Romney, there is one Israeli video, there are 30 Palestinian videos for every one Israeli video. So Blinken said we need to ban it, and the Zionist lobbied to ban it. Donald Trump says, I'm not going to ban it because my son Barron likes it. That's the kind of president Donald Trump is. Yeah. When they wanted to build the Riviera in Gaza and it became the main news, King Abdullah went to visit Donald Trump in a visit that he was slated for, but that I thought was a stroke of diplomatic genius. King Abdullah went to see Donald Trump, terrified that this Riviera will force Palestinians into Jordan, that will force protests, that will force regime change, that will see the fall of King Abdullah. And King Abdullah knew it was an existential crisis if Trump goes through with the Riviera. And Trump had said the day before, we're going to build it, it's going to be awesome, it's going to be... King Abdullah goes and meets with Donald Trump. He doesn't tell him, how dare you? King Abdullah says to him, Mr. President, we believe you're the man of peace. And Trump said, yes, I am the man of peace. Mr. President, we believe that you can solve what Sleepy Joe couldn't solve. Yes, he was stupid, Sleepy Joe. Mr. President, we all want to help you make this peace plan come to fruition. I like this. I like that you want to work with me. King Abdullah says, Mr. President, if you build this Riviera, these Palestinians will come, and our regimes that we want to help you with, we're going to collapse because of these Palestinian regimes. Then you'll have more extreme regimes, and they'll make your life even harder. Then you'll have to spend... And Donald Trump says, oh, I didn't consider this part. Then King Abdullah says, as a gesture, I'll take in 2,000 Palestinians who need urgent medical treatment to show you I'm serious about it. But Mr. President, we need a better plan. Trump goes out in the press conference and says, the day before he said we're building a Riviera, then he goes out with King Abdullah and says it was just an idea, but I'm going to see first what the other allies do. You spent $250 million as a Zionist on this president, demanding his loyalty, that he does everything that you say, and he ends up flip-flapping of a day just because a king came to him and told him, you're a man of peace who deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. That's the kind of president Donald Trump is. And this is the point. He's not a Zionist and he's not anti-Zionist. Donald Trump is with whoever can give him the best deal that makes him look the best. Give him a deal that makes him look like a peacemaker, he'll go for it. Syria, Ahmad al-Shara, this is a fine example I'll give, even though there are many examples you can give. Ahmad al-Shara comes to power, a man who once upon a time said, I am with Al-Qaeda. He goes and he gets into Damascus as a result of Turkey's relentless support and a sort of aligning of the stars with the defeat of Hezbollah in Lebanon on the part of the Israelis. And we talked about it in a different podcast. People can go back to it and find it on Thinking Muslim. Ahmad al-Shara gets into power, and the Israelis scream, as do Democrats and as do all other people say, that Al-Qaeda has won in Damascus. The Israelis, they say, this is a disaster for us that Ahmad al-Shara is in Damascus. We preferred Bashar al-Assad. Mr. President, we need to go into southern Syria and we need to get rid of this new regime in Damascus and take over it. Erdogan, Hakan Fidan goes and meets Marco Rubio in Washington. Mr. President, Marco Rubio, how much money did you guys spend in Afghanistan? Way too much. How much money did you spend in Iraq? Way too much. How much money are you willing to spend on another war? Not a single cent, not a single dime. Why on earth, when Syria now has a potential for stability, we can keep this guy calm. We can keep this guy and keep the stability. We can send in our troops to help to preserve it, and we're a NATO ally. Mr. Trump, when everybody abandoned you in 2020, we didn't abandon you, we stuck with you. We hated Sleepy Joe as much as you hated Sleepy Joe. Yes, you did. We're your allies, yes. So, Mr. President, these Israelis, they're going to cause such chaos in Syria, you'll never be able to leave. We have a good plan to help you with regards to it. Trump says, I like it, this is a good deal, go for it. Netanyahu flies and says, don't listen to Erdogan. And Trump says to Netanyahu, but he's keeping the peace. Syria is still united 1 year on. Syria is not disintegrating. I don't see ISIS and Al-Qaeda like in Syria the way that you said they were going to come. This guy has been able to keep the peace. That's the kind of president Donald Trump is. It's not that he's a good president or a bad president. It's that Biden, whenever Erdogan would speak to him, Biden said, this guy is Islamist, I need to get rid of him. Biden said in the 2020 election campaign that we need to support the Turkish opposition to get rid of Erdogan. He did not even entertain the prospect that Erdogan might be a viable ally in the Middle East to help him to preserve stability. Why? Because Erdogan prays in Hagia Sophia and Kilic Darulu prays with his shoes on, or prays with his shoes on the prayer mat. He prefers secular Kilic Darulu. It's an ideological thing, Biden. Biden put his ideology over the American national interest in his dealings with Erdogan. Trump says, give me the best deal. And that, I'm not saying that this is an opportunity for good or the like. What I'm saying is that it means that no matter how much money you pour into Donald Trump, just as the UAE poured millions into Mohammed bin Salman, you offend him and he will destroy 10 years of UAE policy in Yemen in 5 days, the way that Mohammed bin Salman has done over the past week. You offend Donald Trump, he'll break all of that Zionist plan that you wanted to do in Gaza. One final example, I promise Jalal, final one. Trump presented a 21-point peace plan that was a horrible peace plan. But Erdogan understood Donald Trump. He understood that Donald Trump is not a stickler for details. Trump wants a plan that will help to keep the peace with regards to Gaza. So Erdogan and Qataris, they told the Palestinians, accept the 21-point peace plan. We can negotiate off. They said, but it involves disarmament, but it involves this. They said, trust us, we know Donald Trump. Donald Trump just wants stability and peace in the region. There's a difference between a just peace and an unjust peace. Ali Izzatbegovic in his book, Inescapable Questions, has a lengthy discussion about this in particular, about the just peace and unjust peace. Trump wants peace, even if it is unjust. But that's beside the point right now. When they accepted the deal, Israel was stunned. Why are they accepting this deal when it involves disarmament? Because they understood that Donald Trump later, when he was asked about disarmament, he said, we don't need to rush it. He goes, it's going to take time. We know it's going to take time. There's so much trouble. And the Israelis said, wait a minute, why are you guys speaking as if you're defending the Palestinians? The point here is, what kind of president was Biden? Biden was what the Zionists say, I do. When they tell me jump, I say how high. Why? Because I am a Zionist and I believe that everyone should be a Zionist. He was a candidate that took arguably the most money from AIPAC across his entire career. Donald Trump is like, well, you're giving me 250 million, but the Qataris are, and the Saudis, and the UAE, and Dubai looks lovely, and Riyadh looks amazing, and they gave me red carpet treatment. There is a very interesting report. I promise this is the final point. There's a very funny report. I think this summarizes Donald Trump. So when they were negotiating with the Taliban to withdraw from Afghanistan, right? So all of the American, neocons were saying, and the Democrats were saying, we shouldn't leave Afghanistan. We should stay there. We should keep colonizing it, etc. And Donald Trump was insistent that they need to leave. So when they're about to finish the deal, I'll find the report, I'll send it to you. Maybe you can send it to your subscribers. So the report is that Trump is on a plane flying back to the White House. And one of the advisors says to him, Mr. President, this could be a disaster if we leave Afghanistan. And Donald Trump apparently responded to him and said to him, but did you see the way they called me Your Excellency? That's the kind of president that you're dealing with. And that's why I think that it's not that I think Trump will be good for these issues. It's that there's something refreshing within this very dark world. Refreshing that the forces of evil in Tel Aviv are now just like us, uncertain about what's going to happen next. Give me that over the certainty that the previous regimes offered.
Is there a way to understand the strategy of the Trump administration, even if there is a lack of a strategy? I mean, I'm referring maybe to the national security strategy that was published late last year, which looked at America's new relationship. He called it an America First foreign policy with the Western Hemisphere, with the Middle East, to shore up the dictators and the authoritarians, with China, with Russia, and there's a little bit about Africa. I mean, how can we understand Trump's foreign policy in a sort of joined up way? Or I get from the way you're describing Trump, it's day by day. There is really no central strategy here, despite what's put down on a piece of paper.
I think that first and foremost, my belief is that politics is a science of human relations more than anything else. It's the same way that a human being feels happiness, sadness, concern, pressure, and the like. States feel the same way. And this is why I think that sometimes we focus a lot on policies and the like, but when something happens that doesn't align with the policy, you all get confused. How could this happen when this was the policy? It's because politics is human first and foremost.
Yeah.
I think what we can understand from Donald Trump's policy is that as opposed to running the state like a bureaucracy, he runs it like a monarchy. So whereas, for example, under previous administrations, you dealt with the State Department, you dealt with the Homeland Security, you dealt, etc. It doesn't matter what report comes out from the National Security Agency. I would, if gambling was halal, I would say that Donald Trump probably didn't even read the report. And I think that if somebody tried to implement the report, the way the Trump administration works is you fly to Malaga, the way Kanye West did, and others, and you tell Donald Trump that this is a tragedy, what's happening, and we know this is something you wouldn't do. And Donald Trump then orders a change in the report, or orders a change in personnel, or sacks a chief of staff, or sacks, this advisor here and there, and brings somebody else in a very way that kings used to do in the past. I think that Donald Trump's policy is governed by establishing a very clear interest for the Americans. Show me the benefit for me here. I don't buy the assumption that Donald Trump is necessarily a fool. I think that, for example, when you look at his trade war with China, I think he's identified a very genuine threat with regards to where the future is going, given that the rare earths and what China does in terms of extracting those rare earth materials, being not obliged. One of the reasons why Trump despises the COP23 agreement about the carbon emissions is the China's superiority in rare earths is because it far exceeds the limits that the COP23 imposes on carbon emissions. So it constantly pumps with the carbon emissions to extract raw materials that puts it at an advantage economically and competitively as opposed to Europe and the Americans, and China benefits from it. Trump says, listen, I get you guys want to save the planet, but China here is going to conquer all of us unless we do something. There is a logic behind the madness, even though sometimes perhaps there could be madness there as well. The reason why I say this is that I think that Donald Trump, everyone is trying to look for certainty where there is uncertainty. Right. Everybody is trying to look for consistency where there is an inconsistency. And I think that it reflects the nature of man in that everybody wants to say that there is something certain. In fact, there's almost a metaphysical aspect of it. Everybody wants to know whether there is a God or whether there isn't a God. They want to know what happens after you die. Nobody likes to live in that sense of uncertainty. And it applies to that politics as well. I know that sounds like a vague answer, but the reason why I think that it's hard to gauge a general policy with regards to Donald Trump is because Donald Trump has a propensity to adopt policies that benefit him personally. For example, Israel hit Doha. Usually, when the Houthis hit Saudi Arabia, in 2019, when the Houthis hit the oil facility, and the Saudis were expecting the Americans to intervene to go and bomb Yemen to punish the Houthis as part of the security pact that America has with the Saudis. Trump was in power. Trump looked at the situation and said, what is my benefit of going to bomb Yemen on behalf of the Saudis? Like, why would I do it? Like, what is my benefit in it? And as a result, he did absolutely nothing. And the Saudis got upset. And Trump essentially said, well, there's not much you can do about it. Listen, it's regrettable. But, Yemen is an issue that you guys have to deal with. I don't see why I have to get involved in Yemen. Contrast that to when Doha got hit by the Israelis. Doha, with whom Eric Trump has significant business dealings with. Where Eric Trump, who's overlooking the Trump's financial dealings, is planning to open a hotel, planning to open a golf course, has a lot of transaction relation with Al Thani. Trump immediately goes to the Israelis and tells them, listen, not only what you did was wrong, I want you to call the Qatari Emir and I want you to apologize to him. And not only that, because you're getting out of hand, I'm going to go and start pushing for a ceasefire as well. It's what made Trump move with Qatar in a way he did not move with Saudi Arabia. According to American national interest, you should protect both because Saudi has a lot of benefits with the Americans. But you didn't because Trump didn't see a personal incentive here with the Saudis, which is why bin Salman is offering $1 trillion to say, listen, I'll give you a personal incentive, just have my back, please. And Donald Trump is saying, this is really good. He offered me 600 billion. I told him make it he offered me I told him 500 billion. He offered me 500 billion. I said to him, he said, I'll give you 600 billion. Then he made it 1 trillion. Something like that. Was it 5, 6? Anyway, that's irrelevant. The point is bin Salman saying, if I give him a personal interest, then he'll look after me. How do you, if you're a political science student who's been taught that politics is all about isms and the constructivism and this ism and this where does Trump fit into it? Trump only makes sense if you appreciate that politics is human and that he makes decisions based on that. The Epstein files made him go from this direction to the other direction, made him fall out with Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was his most important ally. That's not something with regards to policy. That's a very personal thing. And I think that's the advantage that Erdogan has over Netanyahu. Netanyahu has dealt with the American state. AIPAC funds Democrats and Republicans. AIPAC pushes candidates in all of those state institutions. AIPAC pushes officials in the State Department, in the National Security Association, in all these other different places, in the Department of Homeland Security. But dealing with a character that can trump all of those institutional bases, that's the advantage that Erdogan has. Erdogan doesn't need to lobby state institutions the way he had to do under Biden or Obama and the like. You can go straight to the king in Malaga and you can flip all of that policy. Do you want to call it Trumpism? Maybe that's what universities will call it in future in order to get more fees extort more fees from students.
Bienvenue sur The Thinking Muslim. C'est un plaisir de vous avoir parmi nous. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa ahlan bik fi barnamij al-Muslim al-Mufakkir. The Thinking Muslim में आपको दोबारा खुशामदीद कहते हैं. मैं आपका आज हमारे साथ होने पर शुक्रगुजार हूँ.
I've got some really exciting news for you. My guests and I now speak Urdu, Arabic and French, with the help of AI, of course. We aim to reach a larger audience and hope to dub our archive and new programs into these languages. I need you to subscribe to these channels and help spread the word. If you want to help this project, please consider making a donation or becoming a member. Can we turn to Saudi-UAE tensions in Yemen, and in particular in southern Yemen? Now, as we speak, Saudi forces are bombing positions in the SDC-controlled region of Yemen. This is a region that the UAE has in effect set up with its proxy forces. And over the last couple of weeks, there have been some really overt tension, I suppose, between the Saudis and the UAE. There was a bombing of supply lines at a port in Yemen, and we've seen stronger language coming from the Saudis towards the UAE. Historically, when there were tensions, the UAE was not explicitly mentioned, it seemed to me, but now it's sort of bowled out into the public. The UAE has at least publicly said that it's removing its forces from the southern part of Yemen. But there seems to be an all-out conflict, if that's not a strong word, between the Saudis, Mohammed bin Salman, and Mohammed bin Zayed. Is that a fair characterization of what's happening between the two countries now?
The dynamics that underpin the relationship between bin Salman and bin Zayed have changed significantly. If we're talking about what happened in Yemen now, there is a province called Hadramaut. Hadramaut, very famous province, even Islamically, historically, very famous province. The Saudis in Yemen have traditionally been unsure what they want in Yemen. Yeah. Do they want the internationally recognized government to be put into power? They are hesitant because the most dominant force is the Islah, and the Islah are considered by the Saudi government to be Muslim Brotherhood. But they remain significant. They were the number 2 power during the Ali Abdullah Saleh era.
Yeah.
Do they want Yemen to be split in two, which is the historic Saudi position? But the Southern Transitional Council is closer to UAE than it is to Saudi, so we're not keen on that either at the moment. Do we make a deal with the Houthis the way we've made deals with the Houthis in the past in 2009 and before?
Yeah.
But the Houthis have reneged on it and they're too close to the Iranians. So the Saudis have been left in sort of this no man's land where they want no party to win. They bombed the forces of the internationally recognized government when they tried to take Aden in 2019. Then they bombed the Houthis. And now they're bombing the Southern Transitional Council. So every party can claim to have been bombed by the Saudis at one particular point. That reflects their paralysis and confusion about what it is that they want in Yemen. The UAE have always been clear about what they want in Yemen and the region and beyond, which is the Arab Spring demonstrated that the people want freedom and want the freedom to reflect their aspirations at the ballot box to choose their leaders. And the UAE is saying, over my dead body will I allow any freedom in the Arab world. You will obey the dictators and obey the brutal dictators. And the UAE is funding genocide in Sudan to prevent the Sudanese from choosing their leaders because they're worried the Sudanese will choose Islamist Muslim leaders. They're bombing they're supporting Haftar in Libya because they're worried that elections will also deliver some sort of Islamic leaning trends and the like. And they're also in different places trying to scupper, and they were leading force in supporting the coup in Tunisia as well to crush that democratic transition as well. So UAE has been absolutely clear. What we want in Yemen is, we want to split Yemen in two. We want a dictatorship in the south, and we don't mind dealing with the Houthis because we have our own relation with Iran that we've done in the past. The Saudis in 2017, 2018 were aligned with the UAE for two reasons. One, they agreed about the threat of the Arab Spring. They were concerned that the Qataris through Al Jazeera were bringing the Arab Spring towards those Gulf monarchies. There might be protests. Saudis might complain about the economic crisis, and therefore they might protest against the regime, and therefore they were natural allies with one another. Bin Salman in particular needed the UAE because after the killing of Jamal Khashoggi at the Saudi embassy in Turkey, he became considered an international pariah. He was at odds with Erdogan, in open conflict with Erdogan, open conflict with Qatar, which had an incredible media lobby with Al Jazeera and the like. They had tensions with Europe and the like. Bin Salman needed the UAE to market him in Washington and in Western capitals. Bin Salman couldn't go to Washington because he became a pariah. He needed the UAE to counter the Qatari lobby and these others who were lobbying against him in Washington. He needed the UAE to spend its money to go and say, Bin Salman is the ruler that you need in order to bring about a de-Islamization in Saudi Arabia, to counter extremism, to counter terrorism and all this other thing. Without the UAE, Bin Salman feared that he would be removed and some of the family members that he'd put in prison would be restored to power, who once upon a time enjoyed the favor of the Americans, like Mohammed bin Naif, etc. Fast forward to today. Erdogan and Bin Salman are now friends. They're no longer fighting with one another. They've reconciled with each other completely. Just today, as we're walking in, they're now discussing naval coordination drills and military drills and also access to Turkish weaponry, and they are becoming very close to one another. Bin Salman and Qatar have reconciled, and Bin Salman unilaterally reconciled with the Qataris without consulting the UAE when Biden administration came, when Biden won the election. Saudi reconciled with Qatar, and since then the Qataris have fully invested in the relationship. Their media doesn't mention any criticism of Mohammed bin Salman. They've kept the peace with Mohammed bin Salman. They've kept their side of the agreement. They are also very close. Iran has lost Syria. It's lost Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's been battered, its proxies in various different areas. Iran is reeling. It's trying to lick its wounds. It doesn't have the ability to press the way it pressed before. Before, you had Saudi Arabia surrounded by Iran's proxies. Iran's proxies are unprecedentedly weak, including the Houthis in Yemen. Iran no longer poses the threat that it once did either. So now Bin Salman suddenly now has breathing room. Before, he needed the UAE to market him through the Israelis in Washington and the like. But now Bin Salman has his own relationship with the Israelis. He has billions of dollars, more than $50 billion investments with Jared Kushner. He's investing in the Israeli economy. He has his own talks now with the Israelis. The Israelis are now courting him separately from the UAE to try to push him to normalization of ties, and they're talking to him directly. More importantly, Bin Salman can now go to Washington again because Donald Trump is in power. With his recent visit that he did a month ago or 2 months ago, he's now back in Washington. He's being rehabilitated, between quotation marks, being welcomed by the US president. He's being greeted by these world powers again. Bin Salman is no longer as dependent on the UAE as he once was. Meaning, when it comes now to Yemen, Bin Salman, the STC tried to take Hadramaut in 2023. The STC, the Southern Transitional Council, are the remnants or those who believe that Yemen should be split into two again. It was split into two before, then it united and became one country. Now they want to split it again. The Southern Transitional Council took advantage of Saudi's uncertainty about what it wanted to achieve, and it was armed and equipped by the UAE. They seized the capital Aden. They took Dhala, they took Lahaj and these areas in the south, and they had no interest in going to the north. They said, that's nothing to do with us. You guys can handle the Houthis. But they're aware that although they have some resources, Hadramaut has a lot of resources. They have to take Hadramaut. In 2023, they tried to take Hadramaut. The Saudis feared that if they take Hadramaut, they will declare a separate state, and they are not ready to handle a separate state. Moreover, Saudi wants an oil pipeline that goes through Hadramaut to the port of Mukalla, and from Mukalla, it helps to bypass any issues in the Red Sea. It can go through Yemen, and it can go. So if the Hormuz is blocked, and if the Red Sea, the Bab al-Mandab is blocked on the Red Sea, where you have Djibouti and Somaliland and these areas, if Hormuz were Oman and Iran, if Iran blocks Hormuz, and you have the Red Sea here, which is blocked, at least you can send the oil through Hadramaut down to Mukalla, and you're able to get into the Red Sea, you're able to get out. So Saudi said, I don't want the STC taking this area. I have my own allies, my own parties that I back. They're in charge of Hadramaut. Don't touch them. The southern separatists, encouraged by Abu Dhabi, said, don't listen to bin Salman. Go towards Hadramaut, believing that bin Salman wouldn't say no to the UAE. When they got towards Hadramaut, started taking areas, bin Salman responded aggressively by setting up a unit that was called Dir al-Watan. Dir al-Watan means National Shield. This National Shield was composed of local tribes and local forces. It became the force, and bin Salman said to the Southern Transitional Council, you need to go back to Aden. And the UAE said, don't push him too hard. Go back to Aden, we'll take another opportunity. The UAE now, given the impunity that it enjoys in Sudan, the impunity it enjoys in Libya, the impunity it's been enjoying following its normalization of ties with the Israelis, the impunity in the way that it secured the port of Berbera in Somaliland, the way that it is now seeing its ambition of controlling those Red Sea ports by making deals with Ethiopia and making deals with Eritrea, and now competing in Somalia with the Turks, and now believing itself to be this Venice-esque power that is now the supreme power in the region. The UAE believed there was nothing bin Salman could do. Now let's force the separation and finally rewrite the map as we wish. So the UAE encouraged the southern separatists and said, now's your time, go for Hadramaut and go and take it. The southern separatists went towards Hadramaut and very quickly started taking area after area after area, and even announced a change in the governor of Hadramaut from the Saudi appointed governor to the UAE STC appointed governor. Saudi initially said, we urge the STC forces to withdraw. Then it was, we urge the powers behind STC to restrain them. We urge our brotherly neighbor to help us to get the STC. And bin Zayed is convinced bin Salman won't do anything. Because even if bin Salman is getting close to Erdogan, he's not going to trust Ikhwan. He's not going to trust the Qataris and the like. Then, surprising everybody, including the Yemenis, bin Salman bombs the areas around the STC troops, killing none of them, telling them, I will bomb you, back off and go back to Aden. I'm not against you, but this is a red line, back off. The Emirati said he's bluffing. Go. They went into Hadramaut, and then the statement came out calling UAE out directly. Then bin Salman bombed the Mukalla port, bombed 2 ships there that he said openly, or the Saudi statement said, UAE was sending weapons. And then Saudi media flipped overnight. Suddenly, UAE is the exporter of radicalism. Everything it accused Iran of Iran supporting proxies, the same language was now being applied to the UAE. The UAE, believing itself greater than Saudi Arabia, believing that bin Salman was weak, responded and started accusing bin Salman of being pro-Ikhwan, pro-Al-Qaeda, terrorist, etc. and the like. And now the media started going against one another because the UAE pundits and UAE believed that on the ground we're stronger than Saudi. Bin Salman might bomb, but our proxies are stronger. The proof is that after Saudi bombed Mukalla, the leader of the Southern Transitional Council, the leader of Southern Separatists, went on television and said, we announce a constitutional declaration. In 2 years, we're going to hold a referendum and we're going to have a separate state. Essentially, the UAE was saying to Saudi, in Arabic, we have a word, toz, which means go to hell. They were saying to the Saudis, forget you. I'm not interested in what you say. Toz fiq. We're going to do an individual separate state and there's nothing you can do about it. The UAE had made the statement that we're withdrawing, but the UAE said we'll withdraw, so we'll give the, sort of a public, bait, but our proxies can announce independence. As soon as the STC announced it, Saudi Arabia began bombing the STC directly. And then the Saudis said, listen, we're going to give a chance to the Southern Transitional Council. Because again, Saudi doesn't know what it wants. Do we want the Houthis? Do we want the Islah? Do we want the internationally recognized government? Do we want STC? Saudi hasn't decided what it wants in Yemen. What it knows that it doesn't want one party to be supreme yet until it decides what it wants to do. So Saudi says to the Southern Transitional Council, I'm holding a meeting in Riyadh. I want you all, every party, to attend this meeting in Riyadh. This was 2 days ago from the time of this recording. The head of the STC, Aydrus al-Zubaydi, understands what's going to happen to him at this meeting in Riyadh. Because when the Saudis were concerned about the internationally recognized government, they invited the internationally recognized government to Riyadh and then put the president under house arrest. And then forced him to abdicate in favor of a presidential council. When Saad al-Hariri failed the Saudis in Lebanon, the Saudis invited Saad al-Hariri to Riyadh and they put him under house arrest. Lavish house arrest, but they put him under house arrest. Aydrus al-Zubaydi, when he refused in 2021 or 2020 to sign the Riyadh agreement, the Saudis had put him under house arrest for 4 months in Riyadh until he signed the agreement and they allowed him to go home. Aydrus al-Zubaydi knew if he goes to Riyadh, most likely he's going to be in prison. But he can't say no to the Saudi invitation.
Why?
Because if he says no to the Saudi invitation, he invites the Saudi aggression against the Southern Transitional Council. So Aydrus al-Zubaydi tries to hold the stick from the middle. Aydrus al-Zubaydi says he's supposed to board the plane. He says, I won't go, but I'll send a 50-man delegation to go to Riyadh. But simultaneously, he starts moving his forces to Dhala to form a front to prevent the Saudi-backed forces of the National Shield from coming towards Aden. Because bin Salman now wants to assert himself in Aden. So they're coming down towards Aden. He lines up here. The Saudis are so furious with this, they start bombing Dhala and they start bombing the Southern Transitional Council forces. Before walking in here, Hani bin Brik and these other like STC individuals based in Abu Dhabi are now accusing Saudi Arabia of treachery. They're accusing Saudi Arabia of having betrayed the cause. But UAE pundits are alternating between attacking the Saudis and between saying UAE is withdrawing, you guys can handle it, we're going to leave a vacuum in that regard. But this has been nothing short of an extraordinary reversal from the UAE. UAE has seen 10 years of construction of a proxy in Yemen undone in 5 days by Mohammed bin Salman. UAE has seen a 10-year project in Yemen collapse in 5 days by the whims of Mohammed bin Salman. UAE overreached against Mohammed bin Salman, and with one stroke of a hand, he has essentially removed that UAE influence, and now his forces are bearing down in Aden. And just before entering, it seems a statement has been made that a curfew is now imposed in Aden, and some of Aydrus's forces are handing over their weapons, fearing a Saudi Arabia onslaught in that regard. This divorce between Saudi Arabia and the UAE has repercussions elsewhere. It remains unclear whether this will spill over into Somalia, Somaliland, with a spillover with the relation with Turkey and the like. Erdogan certainly seems excited by this prospect in terms of pushing, as does probably most of the region, including Egypt.
Because that's a question I want to ask, if I may. Does this show, I mean, it's pretty impressive, you know, in inverted commas, and we don't normally say that about Mohammed bin Salman, but there's some impressive sort of strategic thinking here about Yemen. I'm not saying it's a positive thing, but it's impressive from a foreign policy perspective. But does this show a tactical shift on behalf of MBS, a realignment possibly in the Middle East? Of course, the UAE has been the most problematic state, especially when it comes to relationships with Israel in the Middle East. Or do you feel that it's less tactical, it's less long-term? You know, it is very much about Yemen and about overreach at this moment by the MBZ, by UAE.
In 2021, when UAE normalized with the Israelis, Abdul Khaliq Abdullah, who is a prominent academic based in the UAE, who people tend to consider the unofficial spokesman of the UAE government, said that this normalization will change the geopolitical dynamics in the region, indicating it will come at the expense of Saudi Arabia, which sees itself as a big brother. It's important to understand why Mohammed bin Zayed supported Mohammed bin Salman. Put yourself in bin Zayed's position. Bin Zayed rules a small state of 7 or 8 emirates, the United Arab Emirates. Historically, Saudi, because of its geographic size, because of its wealth, because of its oil, what Saudi says goes. Yes, the smaller states have a say. Saudi Arabia has that Bedouin tradition of hearing everybody's opinion. But ultimately, if Saudi wants to have something done, Saudi has its way. For an ambitious prince like Mohammed bin Zayed, especially after the Arab Spring, it's unacceptable that Saudi Arabia should have that kind of way. So bin Zayed's gamble on bin Salman was not that bin Salman would build a strong Saudi, but that bin Salman would be so incompetent, he would break the power of Saudi Arabia that Saudi Arabia used to leverage against the smaller states. that Mohammed bin Nayef would be problematic because you'd have an independent Saudi that wouldn't necessarily care about what UAE considers and would expect UAE to follow, the idea of the big brother. There is just to give you an anecdote, even though they're bad forms. Back when I could go to Saudi, I went to visit
How long ago was that? Sandy?
this is like 2012, 2013, I can't remember. But anyway.
It seems like you may be going to Saudi soon, inshallah. If Mohammed bin Salman has...
Only Allah knows. Allah will know when I'm his guest, inshallah. But anyway,
Inshallah.
so I was in Riyadh and a representative from one of the ministries was showing me around and he took me to the King Abdulaziz Museum. I've told the story in the Raving in Riyadh podcast, but now, mashallah, you have much more followers. We'll repeat the story. So
That's taking me back, Raven Riyadh.
So we went to the King Abdulaziz Museum in Riyadh. So my host, he takes me. So my host is this former, like colonel, sergeant, very like. So we get to this picture and there is a picture and he tells me, Ya Sami, shuf, look. So I look. It's a picture of King Abdulaziz with the then Emir of Bahrain. Okay, cool. I've read Muhammad Asad's book. He's very glowing about King Abdulaziz. I like his description of him. I have an affinity towards King Abdulaziz. I like the stories about him. I appreciate his limitations. But yeah, nice picture. Okay, yeah. He goes, but look, what do you notice about the picture? I hate museums. So I was like, I don't know. It's mashallah. No, look. What do you want me to say? Allah Barak. No. What do you notice about the way they're sitting? I don't know. They're brothers? No. The Emir of Bahrain is sitting lower than King Abdulaziz. Because, ya Habib, احنا في السعودية in Saudi Arabia, we are the big brother of the region. Bin Zayed hated this attitude that Al Saud saw themselves as the big brother of the region. So Bin Zayed's gamble on Bin Salman was, if I put this video game playing young prince who's ambitious, has little vision and put him on top, he'll smash the family for me, and because I'm the mentor, we'll be equals, and possibly even I'll be on top, because the only way he can maintain power, given he's not in the line of succession, is he will need to trample on the family, he'll need external support, he has problems with Qatar, he has problems with Turkey, I'm the only source he will have, I will be able to run Saudi Arabia by proxy. Bin Salman was never supposed to rebel against the mentor. And this is the reason why I make this point, in that the UAE now doesn't know what to do with Mohammed bin Salman. Do we counter him? Do we have the leverage to counter Mohammed bin Salman? Because he just met with Donald Trump. He's going to give him $1 trillion. He's got good ties with Jared Kushner. His ties with the Israelis is relatively decent. But even the Saudis are now attacking the UAE. And bin Salman, because he's a pragmatist, might even put hands with Erdogan and with the Qataris. There's a very interesting Saudi account that said we should know now the reality of the UAE. And they did a video of bin Zayed hugging Yair Lapid, saying these are their brothers. They almost as if now they're using the normalization as a slur, as opposed to Saudi before, and they said we had to normalize, and this is the future of the region. The reason why I'm making this particular point is how far bin Salman goes remains to be seen, because bin Salman's entire reign has been about putting out fires and navigating fires. Bin Salman hasn't had the space to pursue a particular vision. Vision 2030 is not going very well. He's not getting the investment that he wants. He's been wrestling with the UAE. UAE has even been trying to take land from the Saudis in terms of redrawing the maps and the way it tries to take Musandam from Oman as well. The Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, if you put yourself in his position, UAE lobbied for international recognition and they got it for you. UAE lobbied for or helped to facilitate your ties with the Israelis, which helped you in the Khashoggi affair. UAE helped to market you as this visionary young prince. And certainly some people now, because you're bringing Nicki Minaj and Cardi B and these others, Nicki Minaj refused the invitation, but I think Cardi B was there recently, and Iggy Azalea and these others.
No, I don't follow so closely.
In any case, he introduced them to me. But anyway, because now now I'm being seen as somebody who's new, and Turki Al Sheikh is helping me with that, the head of the entertainment authority. But do I really want to put my hand with Erdogan, who has very Islamist tendencies that my population resonate with? And I go back to square one, which is the whole problem with the Arab Spring was that everybody who said Islam should be political and should play a role in politics resonated with the Saudi population that might give them aspirations to get rid of me as a crown prince and implement somebody else. Do I really put my hand with Erdogan? Do I really put my hand with the Qataris, who only made peace with me after they had suffered reversals in Egypt and Tunisia and these other places as well? So am I going to go from the UAE and go towards Turkey and the Qataris? Is there a way I can forge my own path like over here? And if I forge my own path, what does that mean? I still don't know what I want in Yemen. I still don't know how to handle Iraq. The Iranian proxies are still there. Iran may be weak now, but I still don't know what to do with that in that regard. Ahmad al-Shara', I don't know what to make of him. The Israelis could kidnap him the way that they kidnapped Maduro, and I could be back to square one. And what do I do with regards to Syria? Bin Salman still hasn't decided exactly what he wants to do in that regard. And I think that confusion is what remains to be seen, whether he will make up with the UAE again, or whether this is the start of genuinely a change in Mohammed bin Salman, whereby he says, you know what, now I'm in a better position. Let me actually see how far I can go with this. And I think, if I'm being brutally honest, the Arab Muslim world and beyond are desperately hoping that this is a permanent divorce and that bin Salman somehow can alter his course and go towards a different trajectory.
So, Sami, I mean, I think that's a really important answer. And I want to ask you about Mohammed bin Salman and his motivations here, because, of course, Mohammed bin Salman, for a long time, we've referred to him as a pretty malign leader when it comes to the Muslim world in the Middle East. But here we've got Mohammed bin Salman acting against the interests of the UAE in Yemen. And I suppose my question is, to what extent is this a realignment of Mohammed bin Salman? To what extent has Mohammed bin Salman moved away from the sort of the previous self and now engaging with Turkey and Qatar and engaging with forces that may be a little bit better aligned in the Middle East than previously? I suppose, is there a reassessment we need to make at this stage of MBS? Because, of course, MBZ has acted in a very malign way in the Middle East until now, and in particular in Sudan. So how should we understand bin Salman's move here?
So I think in this context, when you look at the way that Mohammed bin Salman now is so deeply offended by the UAE and now has the breathing space to be able to say, I don't need the UAE like I used to. I'm not this incompetent prince that you thought that I was. I'm not your proxy in Riyadh to destroy the kingdom or to make it some sort of, 8th or 9th emirate of the United Arab Emirates. The reality is that bin Zayed doesn't know what to do with a crown prince who's now asserting himself and actually entertaining the idea of going on a trend that is not just different from the UAE, but completely counter to the UAE. Mohammed bin Salman sent his foreign minister on the same day that he bombs the STC, on the same day that he completely decimates UAE's investment in Yemen. The Saudi Crown Prince sends his foreign minister to Marco Rubio in Washington to sit with Marco Rubio and, in my opinion, to explain to Marco Rubio that the threat now in the region is the United Arab Emirates. Wow. This Abu Dhabi capital, this Mohammed bin Zayed, is starting to cause issues that you need to pay attention to. And remember, the reason why Marco Rubio is so significant is because Marco Rubio is the individual in Congress who's been coming out, the Secretary of State of the State Department, he's the one coming out in Congress who's been openly mentioning about the UAE and the crimes that the UAE is doing in Sudan, implying that the Americans are aware of what's happening, and perhaps the only thing preventing an American intervention against the UAE may well be the Israelis and the normalization that they have with the UAE. For Faisal bin Farhan to meet Marco Rubio, the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, is almost as if the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman wants to present his complaints about the UAE to Washington before the UAE can go to Tel Aviv and ask Tel Aviv to lobby against Mohammed bin Salman in Washington. At the same time, the deputy foreign minister is meeting today with Burhan at the time of our recording, on the same day the Saudis bombing the STC, meeting with Abdel Fattah Burhan, the head of the armed forces of Sudan, the one that the UAE are trying to get rid of by supporting Hemeti, the genocidal militia that's killing in Sudan. As if Saudi is saying, not only is this going to be limited to Yemen, I'm coming after you in Sudan. Right. And now the fear that Haftar will have in Libya is this going to spill over into Libya, whereby Mohammed bin Salman turns around and says, I don't actually have an interest in demolishing the aspirations of the Sudanese and the Libyans. This was something that I did with the UAE. It made sense at the time, but times are now different. What if I can revamp my image from somebody who was seen as the one who wrought destruction on these different states? What if I, as the only power in the region who can rein in the evil of the UAE, emerge as a regional leader that can bring together Erdogan, bring together the Qataris, and Sisi in Egypt, who is eagerly watching what's happening between Saudi and the UAE. Sisi announced that he received, quote, a fantastic offer from the UAE to invest in the ports in the Suez Canal. UAE wants to take 90% control of the ports in the Suez Canal. It's not content with controlling only Berbera and Aden and DC. It wants to control the Suez as well. Egypt rejected the UAE offer, suggesting that it's watching who's going to win between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The point is that this incompetent prince, as bin Zayed viewed him in Riyadh, now there is a potential chance he may actually emerge as an independent regional leader, not necessarily in a transformed ideological way with regards to the de-Islamization stuff that we talked about before, but a regional leader who is capable of bringing about a unified stance on some of the particularly heated zones that might actually, with a Trump presidency, actually bring about a resolution to it. The question here is whether bin Salman actually has the vision for it. The question is whether bin Salman is, as bin Zayed imagined him, this incompetent video gaming prince who's just set on ruling this kingdom, winning over the Saudi youth by bringing them parties and the like, or whether bin Salman can actually dream of something bigger, because the reality is bin Salman finds himself in a very interesting situation. Whereas before he was being lambasted as a tyrant, it can safely be said that the overwhelming majority of not only the Arab world, but also the Muslim world and beyond the Muslim, including Europe, where UAE has been bullying European governments to crack down on what it calls Islamist tendencies and the like, by inviting Tommy Robinson to Abu Dhabi, supporting Nigel Farage and these others. These European governments are eagerly anticipating, can bin Salman cut the UAE down to size? Can it clip the UAE's wings? Bin Salman is at a crossroads whereby he could potentially go from being somebody who is derided by the majority in the world to one in which people say, hang on a second, maybe the young prince is actually starting to become a leader. It remains to be seen whether bin Salman actually adapts that road. But what is certain is that Ankara, Cairo, and Doha are all gently pushing Mohammed bin Salman, telling him, yeah, bin Salman, you don't need to be a puppet of the UAE. Yeah, bin Salman, you don't need to fight all these Islamic tendencies the way the UAE is fighting. Yeah, bin Salman, there is a scenario where you transform your image from the one who killed Khashoggi to the hero of the Arab and Muslim world by cutting the head of the snake in Abu Dhabi, whereby you bring peace in Sudan where UAE has committed genocide, you bring peace in Libya where UAE has funded a warlord to split the country into two, where you bring peace in Yemen where the UAE has tried to divide it into two, and where you actually managed to bring a security infrastructure between Turkey, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. Because the other dynamic here is this. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has been trying to get state-of-the-art weapons from the Americans and the Israelis. The Israelis have been saying to him, we don't trust the Saudi Crown Prince with that kind of weapons and technology. When bin Salman tried to go to China, the US bullied bin Salman into cancelling those relations with China or those weapons transfer with regards to China. So he went to Pakistan and said to Pakistan, I want some of that technology that you used against those Indian planes. And now with Erdogan offering the advanced technology with those remote fighter jets that Erdogan has built as well, it may well be that bin Salman, who's come up against the wall in the weapons technology from the US, who the Israelis are bullying him and demanding that he normalize before they give him technology transfer, who now finds the Israelis, Eddie Cohen on Twitter, calling Saudi Arabia treacherous for going against the UAE, bin Salman is at a crossroads whereby he has the chance to say that all the stuff I did before didn't benefit me anything. In the end, the UAE actually thought it was greater than me. Maybe now I should try a different way. And it may well be that a population that despises bin Salman for what he did over the past 7 years may well remember him as the hero who finally crushed the UAE's satanic influence that demolished so many Muslim countries just because the UAE believed that the populations don't deserve freedom. They are destined instead only to obey a dictatorship.
Wow. I mean, alhamdulillah, we've been doing this for the last 3 years and a bit. And I've never really had an answer that has been so amazed. I've been so amazed by. I mean, you know, how do we understand what may happen in the coming years? Because of course, until now, we've just looked at MBS in the same light. You know, we've seen MBS and MBZ as two sides of the same rotten coin. How do we understand these turn of events, Sami? Like, what is it that explains? I'm not talking about the politics now. I'm talking about sort of from the metaphysical that we always come back to on this show. How do we understand these turn of events, Sami?
I think there's always been a misunderstanding of the idea of obey the ruler that people used in order for people to obey a ruler no matter what he does. The Muslim, when he sees something evil, says this is evil, it should stop. But when he sees something that brings benefits to the ummah, he says, Ahsant, this is good, you should do it. And you will have the backing of people whenever you pursue the correct path and a path that brings good to this ummah. The reality is that from this capital of Abu Dhabi, money, millions and billions are spent in order to attack Muslim communities in Europe, to attack Muslim communities in America, to go and tear apart Sudan, to tear apart Libya, to tear apart Somalia, where you have a tribe in the north, there's Haq tribe of Somaliland, now the UAE encouraging it to go and normalize with the Israelis and to tear those Somali tribes apart. Despite, even though they were still remained in a fragile state, UAE is exacerbating that fragility. The UAE which goes and bullies Kuala Lumpur, the UAE which goes and tries to bully Pakistan and drags Pakistan into a conflict it has no benefit in. Why did the UAE go to Pakistan and say to Asim Munir, go and give weapons to Haftar? What did the Libyan do to the Pakistani regime, whereby Asim Munir comes and gives weapons to Haftar who's using it to go and kill the Libyans and establish a dictatorship run by him and his two sons in Libya? What did the Libyan do for Asim Munir to come and bring Pakistan and involve it into the killing of Muslims at the behest of the UAE? What did any of these Muslim ummah do for Pakistan to be dragged in it? What Pakistan, which used to pride itself on not harming the ummah but being a source of pride for the ummah in terms of trying to advance the ummah's interests. The reality is that when you're looking at what's unfolding, I think that when you see something that is good, you should support it and you should back it. This doesn't mean that bin Salman is not doing stuff that's a madness inside Saudi Arabia. But what if in his security, he no longer sees a threat in Salman al-Auda and has him released? Is that not something you would celebrate? What if now that he feels more secure, he can finally reveal what happened to Sulaiman al-Dawish? Or maybe he releases Awad al-Gharni? Or maybe he releases, they said Muhammad al-Arifi appeared recently, a couple of days ago, a sign that the UAE interpreted as that bin Salman is opening the door to these trends that he used to crush in order to indicate that you've pushed me so far, I'm no longer going to keep these doors closed, I'm going to open them. If bin Salman is going to open those doors and it's going to bring benefit, it's not necessarily that one should support it, even though I think one should support it, but one should not deny the ramifications and repercussions of what that has on the region itself. The reality is that every Muslim dreams of a Turkish-Saudi-Pakistani alliance. Everybody dreams of technology transfer between the Muslim world. Everybody dreams of finances between the Muslim countries, a railway that goes from Ankara all the way to Riyadh or Jeddah or to Medina and these other places, or even to go to Islamabad. I went to Spain for the past 2 weeks and I called my father, told him, Baba, I'm going to Faro in Portugal. He goes, oh, mashallah, it's 2 hours from Sevilla. So on my way back, I called him and he said to me, so how was the border? And I said, there's no border, you literally just cross the bridge. And he went, the European Union. Why should we not encourage things like an open border where you can drive from Istanbul all the way to Jeddah with no border checks? You just drive as one ummah. These are things that if bin Salman said it tomorrow, on what pretext would I come on thinking Muslim and say this is a bad thing? And this is why I say that politics is the science of human relations. The same way that human beings, their feelings fluctuate, the same way sentiments fluctuate, the same way worldviews change as well, such is the case with states as well. I'm not saying that bin Salman has had an epiphany. I'm saying that what bin Salman has done in Yemen against the UAE, Yemenis are celebrating, even those who don't like bin Salman. That what bin Salman has done to a 10-year UAE project in the space of 5 days is being celebrated by people who criticize bin Salman for what he does inside Saudi Arabia, indicating that it's not a hatred of bin Salman himself. It's a hatred of what is evil, and if he does good, he will be supported in it. And that's why the question that everybody is asking now, even in Ankara, in Sudan, in Khartoum, in Madani, in Trablus, in these other places is, Ya Mohammed bin Salman, you've given us a reprieve by punching UAE in the nose. Ya bin Salman, Kammel, go finish it, Ya bin Salman. These guys slaughtered us, Ya bin Salman. These guys massacred us, Ya bin Salman. These guys gave weapons and massacred us, and no one could do anything about it. And here comes bin Salman to punch them in the nose. People are saying, Ya bin Salman, is this something new? And they're hoping that it's something new. It's not to say that bin Salman has become good. Rather, it's to show that the dynamics have changed. And I think it will bring benefit to the ummah if the UAE is isolated and disciplined and restrained and told that your alliances with Israel and the far right to destroy Muslim communities is not the way that it should be. And the reality is now in Yemen, Saudi Arabia and Oman have far more influence in terms of influencing Yemen now that Saudi Arabia has pushed the UAE out. Turkey and Saudi Arabia in Syria have the potential to save that country from falling apart and to rebuild it and make it into a powerhouse. Qatar and Saudi Arabia have the ability to protect that Gulf region from external influences and to use their lobbying and financial power for the good of this ummah. The question that you're posing when you say it amazes me, it only amazes somebody who believes that politics never changes, who believes the human condition can never change, who believes that man was born with an original sin and Tawbah never exists. I'm not saying bin Salman is interested in Tawbah. I'm saying that when somebody does evil, ibadallah, say it is evil. But when he does something that is good, don't begrudge saying this is actually very good. And I think what bin Salman has done here is a brilliant strategic maneuver whereby he has demonstrated that the billions that UAE spent can disappear with the stroke of a hand of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, showing that what the UAE is building is a spider's web, and what we need is leaders to stand up against that evil. The question is, how do you encourage bin Salman to keep doing it?
So let's move on to Somaliland. Israel recognized, first country in the world to recognize Somaliland after decades of acting as, in effect, a pseudo-state. What lay behind this announcement by Israel?
I think it's important that when anybody opens up a map of the ports in the Red Sea region and the Bab al-Mandab Strait, you will find that the UAE has invested heavily in the Berbera port in what is considered Somaliland, invested heavily in Djibouti, invested heavily in Aden, essentially controlling that strait. And historically, 1500s, 1400s, 1600s, Portuguese and the Ottomans and all these other empires, they fought bloody wars across the world, including in India and the like, for control of those shipping routes that go through it. The UAE is becoming the main economic dominant power in that particular region. But the UAE is aware that at any moment, Saudi Arabia or some of these bigger powers can undo a lot of that influence. And so they've been trying to secure some sort of insulation from any possibility of a breakdown in relationship with Saudi Arabia that might ruin the UAE's project in the Red Sea. Bin Zayed's conclusion is the best insulation you can get is normalization of ties with the Israelis, because according to Bin Zayed and in the words of the former Qatari Prime Minister Hamad bin Jassim, Israel or Tel Aviv is the key to Congress and the White House. If you win Tel Aviv, you win the White House and Congress, and you win that impunity. And the reality is that the UAE has enjoyed that impunity since its normalized ties. In the midst of these tensions that are emerging with Saudi Arabia, even before Yemen, there were tensions emerging with regards to drawing the maps of the borders. UAE is claiming territory that's currently under Saudi control. Saudi launched a complaint to the United Nations and the case is ongoing over there. The UAE always felt that there was a possibility bin Salman might lash out. Let me threaten him with the Israelis. In order to secure Somaliland's willingness to support, the UAE and Israel offered normalization of ties with Somaliland and recognition of Somaliland. UAE technically is already, it has a base in Hargeisa and it's been investing in Somaliland for many years now, much to the chagrin of Somalia itself. UAE believe that Somalia and Mogadishu is closer to Turkey and therefore it's investing in Somaliland, or it's wrestling with Turkey and Somalia. In any case, Somaliland denies that the recognition from Israel is dependent upon taking in the Palestinians. But it's hard to imagine Israel offering recognition to Somaliland without anything in return. Israel is trying to find any state that's willing to take in the Palestinians, and the reports suggest that Somaliland agreed to take in 1.5 million Palestinians. The tragedy of the situation is that the reason Somaliland was able to secure that recognition from the Israelis is because of an environment whereby the fabric of society between the Somali tribes has been so broken as a result of decades of oppression and infighting that Israel and UAE were able to capitalize on that particular tribalism. Because it's important to remember that those who inhabit the current territory of Somaliland, which historically was the Adalite Kingdom, which used to be supported by the Ottoman Empire, which actually almost conquered Ethiopia. And then the Portuguese supported Ethiopia and they managed to push the Adalites back into what's the modern day area of Somaliland. When Somaliland became independent, because Somalia had the unfortunate position similar to Morocco of being colonized by two different nations, Italians in the south and British to the north. When they got independent, Somaliland, or the tribes that compose Somaliland, they were willing to join this wider Somali Union, and they did. They joined this wider Somali Union, albeit elections took place on a clan basis. Then there was a coup and imposition of a communist regime. A communist regime that was brutal to a whole range of various different clans. And there were also Somali tribes in eastern Ethiopia, in Ogaden and some of these other places. A number of events, we don't need to go into detail, resulted in brutal crimes being committed against different Somali clans, amongst them the tribes that allied and normalized with the Israelis themselves. The reason why I mention all of this is Somaliland does not accept Israeli recognition if the Ummah had done a better job of reconciling the Somali factions. If the Ummah hadn't abandoned what I call, the Aus and Khazraj and the Qurashi tribes, the modern versions fighting each other, there's no way Israel capitalizes on that. And the reason I want to focus on this particular point before I go back into geopolitics is, it's what happened with Somaliland and the way people suddenly discovered Somaliland when the news came out that Israel recognized it, shows you another example of what we've been talking about many times on this podcast, the disconnect between the Ummah's consciousness, the disconnect between the Ummah's limbs, in that people aren't aware of what happened between these clans and therefore they didn't have the agency or power in order to go and reconcile between these Somali clans. But put that aside, the UAE secures recognition for Somaliland from Israel, and Somaliland hopes that with Israeli recognition will come US recognition, and then will come European recognition, and with that recognition will come the establishment of a particular state, so that when Puntland, which is the semi-autonomous area next to it, goes and marches in again to take territory from what it believes to be Somaliland, from what Somaliland believes Somaliland, it will be able to call an international force to preserve it. The disaster is that as part of this normalization agreement, there's an expectation of Israeli military base on the Red Sea, that the UAE will protect UAE interests against Saudi Arabia, against Egypt, against these other powers that are there on the Red Sea themselves. I think that although many in Somaliland are against this normalization with the Israelis, a lot of them appear powerless to reverse it. The president of Somaliland stood next to the foreign minister of the Israelis, even as he said, Somaliland is a state not like this Palestinian, and he didn't even say anything against it either.
Yeah.
And the tragedy for those tribes that compose Somaliland, or one main tribe in particular, is that they will forever be labeled by the Ummah as traitors, because there is no excuse on earth that allows a normalization with the Israelis, despite any recognition of hardship that they went through in the past. I think that the UAE believes that with this normalization, it will further cement its ability to control that Red Sea port. But what's interesting is this. After the Saudis lashed out at the UAE has issued a statement saying that it rejects the Israeli recognition of Somaliland. It's almost as if the UAE, terrified that Saudi Arabia might force a whole domino effect, the UAE is sort of saying, wait a minute, I need to make sure that I don't lose everything. So let me start distancing myself from here, suggesting that bin Salman actually has the power to make this recognition meaningless. Bin Salman has the power, if his forces enter Aden, and he's able to take a greater role in what happens in Somalia, alongside Erdogan. This is the point about this Erdogan-bin Salman alliance. Erdogan already with significant influence in Somalia itself. These two have the potential to completely redraw those maps. And if they have a particular vision, they can actually reconcile between the Somali tribes in a way that will make Somaliland's recognition of Israel irrelevant, because they might be able to push for a unity between Somaliland and Somalia, given that they were united once upon a time before Zayed, Barri and these others came with the communist regime and essentially caused havoc between these particular clans. I think it's a tragedy, but I don't think that it's set firmly in place, because no other nation has recognized Somaliland immediately after Israel has recognized. Donald Trump hasn't recognized Somaliland. The one final thing I will mention here is, because I know that you have a guest lined up to talk about Somaliland, I don't want to take it away from him to explain into more detail, is that the recognition of Somaliland puts into context the sudden attack on Somalis in Minnesota. That in order to secure recognition from the Israelis, that president of Somaliland threw the Somalians in Minnesota under the bus, that president allowed the UAE and Israel to lobby for a fierce media campaign that has put the lives in upheaval of those Somalian brothers and sisters in Minnesota for the sake of securing some short-term gain. And the worst part is that Somaliland is not even getting recognition as an independent state. Somaliland is getting recognition as a transit worker for the UAE and Israel in those ports. It's essentially saying, you can use my land to use your military bases and to use my ports. It's not gaining independence, it's giving that independence away. And the biggest challenge here is this now. Somaliland will be supported now by Ethiopia, by Israel, and by the UAE. Ethiopia is landlocked. Ethiopia is already using the port of Berbera in order to access the Red Sea, because the UAE has facilitated the agreement between Ethiopia and Somaliland, despite the tensions and wars that have taken place in the past. The only solution to this, in my opinion, is that Saudi Arabia and Turkey get involved, reconcile between the Somali parties before it gets out of hand, because once Israel has its military base in that Red Sea region, the UAE tried to set it up in Socotra, but now Socotra, the Saudis have taken over it. It seems that the UAE Socotra flights are no longer taking place. Now it's Socotra to Saudi Arabia. Saudi seems to have taken control of it. If Israel establishes that base on Somaliland, it will be very difficult to convince the Americans to reverse it.
A quick question on Syria. We spent a lot of time in the summer in Kuala Lumpur actually talking about Syria, and you argued a very pragmatic argument that what else can the Syrian government do? Its back is against a wall, and it's currently in a very difficult situation. So it has to make some peace with its neighbors in order to survive. But of course, there have been some slightly disturbing or very disturbing things that I want you to comment on. In particular, there was a conversation or a story about a U.S. brokered intelligence sharing agreement with the Israelis, or at least that's how it was touted, between the Syrian government and the Israelis. And secondly, the arrest of the human rights activist Bilal Abdul-Karim. As far as I know, until now, he's disappeared, and he's a brave man, and no one knows where he's being held. Just comment on those two things, please.
I think firstly, it's important to note that the Israelis are unhappy with this coordination agreement with Damascus. Because what the US has been trying to broker is a cessation of hostilities in the south of Syria. The Israelis want to take Suwayda or establish an autonomous region in Suwayda because they don't trust Ahmad al-Shara in Damascus, and they don't trust the Damascus government. As part of an agreement, a peace deal agreement, Ahmad al-Shara and the Turks have been saying to the Americans that, look, we don't want any beef with the Israelis. And Ahmad al-Shara has been arguing, they're not even my priority. My priority is handling the separatist Kurds in northeast Syria. My priority is rebuilding Damascus, Aleppo, Deir ez-Zor, and these other places. My priority is to try to get the value of the currency up again. My priority is to get Bashar al-Assad's face off the currency and introduce a new currency. My priority is to try to keep this place united, given that the Iranians are trying to fund proxies in order to divide the state once more. My priority is to actually build an army and actually build the state in the first place. I don't even have the power to go after the Israelis. The Israelis are saying, all of these reasons are why we need to attack Syria now, before they have the power in order to establish themselves. When the Israelis went to Donald Trump says, but what you're proposing is American intervention. It costs too much money and we're not willing to intervene. And Erdogan is telling me he can handle it. The Israelis said Erdogan is lying. Erdogan seems to have convinced Donald Trump, at least for now, to recognize Ahmad al-Shara and also invite Ahmad al-Shara to America. And Ahmad al-Shara met with Donald Trump, and so did Shaybani, and with Hakan Fidan and all these others. In order to appease the Israelis to get them off Ahmad al-Shara's back, Trump tried to push for some sort of normalization of ties between the Syrians and the Israelis. Ahmad al-Shara said, I can't normalize, but I can uphold the ceasefire agreement that was made in 1972. The Israelis tried to tout this as normalization, but nobody bought it. It was clear that it was a ceasefire agreement. Trump said, listen, this isn't really a big deal for me. If you don't want to normalize, fine, but at least the ceasefire agreement is a starting phase, and let's see how far we can go for it. And Tom Barak, who is the US ambassador to Turkey, who admires Turkey, is a good friend of Erdogan as well. Tom Barak seems to agree with the Turkish viewpoint that now is not the time for any hostilities with regards to the Syrians. So it feels like the Israelis have been dragged into this sort of agreement with the Syrians, whereby Trump says to the Israelis, this intelligence sharing means you can always keep an eye on what Ahmad al-Shara is doing. When you feel he's going too far, at least all the information will be apparent. He can't do anything in secret through this particular agreement. The point that I'm saying is, many people will find it disappointing that Damascus has made a deal with the Israelis. But when you look at the terms of this deal, it's Israel which is the most upset, because immediately after agreeing to this, Ahmad al-Shara and the Turks then march on Aleppo in order to deal with the separatist Kurds who are trying to establish a northeastern autonomous region and waving Israeli flags in that region, to the northeast autonomous region, trying to take the oil away from Syria and offering Israel recognition in order to ensure that they don't have to follow the commands or the orders of the Damascus government. The separatist Kurds are saying, we don't want to lose this chance at an independent state, a bit like Somaliland. We prefer to fight the Syrians and establish ourselves, even if it means allying with the Israelis. With this deal with the Israelis, Ahmad al-Shara is saying, now that Israel is out the way, now that they can't bother me, now that Trump is reining them in through this agreement, I can now focus on keeping Syria united. I can actually start to build a state over the next 5, 6, 7 years that can actually stand up to the Israelis themselves. And that's why I think geopolitically, I don't think it's as bad as some people initially thought when they read that particular agreement, because the loser in this is Israeli, and it doesn't really dictate any normalization of ties. On the issue of Bilal Abdul Karim, if I had to say something, I would advise anybody who knows that the UAE doesn't like them and who knows the Saudis have issues with them, do not go to Damascus. The reason being is your presence there will cause a diplomatic crisis for Damascus. And Damascus, even if it's sympathetic towards you, does not have the power to protect you. Abdurrahman Qardawi was in Damascus, went to celebrate with the Syrians. He did a video where he said, I know Saudi and UAE will be upset at the liberation of the Syrians. He crossed the border. As soon as he crossed the border, he was kidnapped, surrendered to the UAE, and no one knows where he is. It is plausible that Damascus knew it was going to happen, but was powerless to do anything to prevent it. Ash-Shamsi, who is an Emirati critic who was based in Istanbul. When Erdogan reconciled with the UAE for $50 billion, Erdogan ordered all people who were in Istanbul, told them, guys, I need you to tone down your criticism of the UAE because they give me $50 billion. And I need the money because of the economic crisis. Ash-Shamsi, whose wife is Syrian, when Syria became liberated, said to his wife, let's go live in Damascus. Syria is free. Let's go settle over there. He moved to Damascus, and then his wife tweeted and said, my husband has disappeared for 3 weeks. We know he was taken by the government, but the government won't give us any information where he is. 4th week, 5th week, 6th week. I think yesterday she tweeted, it's been now 3 months. No one knows where Shamsi is. And when you ask some officials in Damascus government, there's sort of, this is a very difficult thing for us. Indicating that because of their situation, Damascus believes it needs to appease UAE and Saudi. So anybody who has a problem with these two governments, Damascus does not have the power to protect you. Damascus will not protect you. And if they are asked to hand you over, it is more likely they will hand you over, even if it's begrudgingly, because they will not jeopardize the potential money that comes in to invest in the economy for the sake of Abdurrahman Qardawi or for the sake of Ash-Shamsi. With Bilal Abdul Karim, I think the situation is slightly different. Bilal Abdul Karim famously complained about the torture that took place in prisons when Ahmed al-Shara was ruling in Idlib. Did a famous video, and he himself, did a video where he described what had happened to him in those particular prisons. But he still supported the Syrian revolution, and he stuck with it, and he went with them to Damascus. He was a reporter. Bilal Abdul Karim, who had his citizenship stripped as an American and was also put on a kill list by Obama administration, there was a sense by those who came in from the outside who'd been violated by their governments, like Tawqir and these others who had their citizenship removed, that as a result of having supported the Syrian revolution, they would get at least Syrian citizenship as sort of a gesture, and therefore they wouldn't be stateless, they'd actually have a citizenship. The problem is that when Ahmed al-Shara started negotiating with the Americans, one of the conditions that was imposed on Ahmed al-Shara is that no citizenship be given to a non-Syrian. Those who came from outside must not be given a citizenship. So Bilal Abdul Karim naturally felt a bit aggrieved in terms of that, but he was allowed to stay in Syria by the government because there was an implicit arrangement that, thank you guys for your service, you can stay here. Bilal Abdul Karim continued his reporting on some of the violations that took place, that happened in many states and the like. And it seems that what it appears is that some of those criticisms went too far, and now he has seemingly disappeared. And the issue is not whether he faces justice or not. The issue is nobody knows where he is. At least when you're arrested, you know where you're. For example, when I was arrested by ICE, it became clear I was taken to this facility later, albeit in the first few hours a bit difficult, but everybody knew where I was. They knew what the updates were. You could reach me, by a phone and the like. They don't know where Bilal Abdul Karim is. And so I would say here from this platform to the government of Damascus, don't hand over Ash-Shamsi to the UAE. Send him back to Turkey. Send him to Turkey, send him somewhere else. If you can't protect him, send him somewhere else. But let his wife know where he is. Let his wife know that he's safe. Let his wife know that he's okay. You did a revolution in order against a regime that used to do this to people. Don't be a regime that does this to people. We know you can't protect these people. We know you're under a difficult situation. We know you're being bullied by many powers. We know you're in a difficult situation. We know that you need to navigate it. We will stay well away so we don't cause you any diplomatic problems, but release Shamsi. Bilal Abdul Karim, find some sort of solution for him. Let him go. Let him speak to his wife. Put him through a court system. Show people that you're justice, but let his wife know where he is. And with Abdurrahman Qardawi, which was a very painful and very horrible situation that took place. Yes, he was kidnapped in Lebanon, but there were question marks over that. Don't be a regime where people turn around and say this is what happens to critics and the like. I pray that Bilal Abdul Karim is safe. I pray that Shamsi is safe. And I pray that while I understand the situation in Syria, I pray that the bravery that they showed in the revolution, they will show that bravery in standing up for justice, even with all the pressure that's coming up against them.
Jazakallah khair. Finally, Sami, we're coming to Ramadan. We're not so far away from Ramadan, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us once again with this month. So many of us increase our ibadat in the month of Ramadan. And in particular, we focus much more on our dua and we focus on our worship to and our prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help and to ask Him for mercy subhanahu wa ta'ala. I just want to ask you a question. It's a question I've been meaning to ask you for some time. How should we, with all of what you've said today, with the rulers who have gone one way and then maybe their recovery, with the fate and the complexities of the Muslim Ummah, with Gaza still looming after 2.5 years nearly, Gaza still remains a burning sore in our soul as Muslims. With all of what is happening, how should we as Muslims construct our dua in this month to maximize the possibility that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers our dua and recovers the state of the Muslim Ummah?
Often there is assumption that when Ramadan comes, this is the time to rest. This is the time to reflect. This is the time to sit down. This is the time to take it easy. This is the time where, because we're fasting, don't do too much. Which for me is a very strange concept as a Muslim. Because the Quran, the revelation, first revelation that told the Prophet ﷺ to move and go and convey the message, go and tell people about Islam, that revelation came during Ramadan. He wasn't told to rest during this month and wait 30 days before you go out and convey. He was told during Ramadan, get up and go and convey the message. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. Read about what I'm about to reveal to you and go out and go and mobilize. Go and tell people about Allah. Go and tell people you're the messenger. Go and tell people that they need to stop injustice. Go and tell people they need to stop the oppression. Go and tell people they need to stop burying their daughters alive. Go and tell people they need to stop cheating each other. This was done in the month of Ramadan. Laylatul Qadr, the night of power where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manifests Himself. Allah is not resting in this regard. Where Allah manifests Himself happens during Ramadan. The conquest of Mecca when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ entered Mecca happened during Ramadan. The battle of Ain Jalut where the Muslims defeated the Mongols, Saifuddin Qutuz, happened during Ramadan. The battle of Guadalete where Tariq ibn Ziyad defeats Roderick in Andalusia happened during Ramadan. The battle of Hittin where Salahuddin al-Ayyubi defeats the Crusaders happened during Ramadan. The reality is that whenever you look at the events that took place in Ramadan, those who came before us weren't resting in Ramadan. Those who came before us didn't sit during Ramadan. Those who came before us didn't see Ramadan as the month where you stop, where you give a gift to Netanyahu and tell him Ramadan is when we should start bombing Gaza because the Muslims are sitting down because they're not eating as they usually do, so they must be more tired. There's always been an uptick in the bombing of Gaza during Ramadan because just as we claim it is a blessing for us, Netanyahu sees it as a blessing because we tend to reduce our activities. We reduce our ability to talk. We reduce our protest. We reduce our boycott. We reduce our activity. Whereas the whole point of Ramadan is to demonstrate you can do a lot with less than you thought you could do it with. The point is when you're not eating during the day and Sahaba are still pulling off these feats, when you're not eating during the day and you're giving up that food and water, but you realize you can actually get through the day, you're having more taqwa, you're realizing actually, wait a minute, I can do so much more with less than I thought. I can do so much more and I don't need to eat as much. I have more energy than I thought. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminding you that you don't need as much as you think that you need in order to move. You don't need as much as you think as you need in order to make an impact. The problem when we talk about Ramadan is we talk about like it's a stopgap. But the reason Allah introduces this fasting for us is not لَعَلَّكُمْ تَرْتَحُونَ, so that you might relax and the like. When Allah says كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, that you might achieve taqwa. What is taqwa? Ubay ibn Ka'b was asked by Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. Yeah, Umar said to Ubay, what is taqwa? So Ubay says to Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhuma, have you ever walked on a thorny path, Ya Umar? So Umar says yes. And Ubay says, Ya Umar, how did you walk on this thorny path? He said, before I took every step, I'd watch to see where I put my foot. Ubay said, this is taqwa. Note here that the action that Umar is using to reference taqwa is not an action of sitting. It's an action of continuing to walk on the path. It's a proactive motion. It's putting the foot forward and the other foot forward. The only difference that happens in Ramadan to your movement is you become more concentrated and precise with your movements, because the fasting makes you less wanton to waste any energy or waste any movement. So you start being careful. Okay, if I'm going to boycott, where am I going to boycott? If I'm going to protest, which one are we all going to go to together? If I'm going to go and raise my voice, what particular topic am I going to do? Is everybody going to go quiet about liqa kurdiya during Ramadan because there is some sort of rest that you need to take? The reality is that when you look at the examples of the past, Ramadan was not a month of rest. Ramadan was a month of reflection about the powers that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you, about the presence of Allah so that He can deliver it, about the power of Allah, how He brought these victories in spite of the people fasting, suggesting the fasting attributed more taqwa, which allowed Allah to deliver those victories. Ramadan is a moment of reflection, not rest. It's a month of reset, not rest. It's not a month where you sit down, it's a month where you move. What I am terrified of with this Ramadan that's coming up is that everybody thinks it's like a pit stop in a Formula 1 race, where you go and relax and you park your car and you say to yourself, I'm having a pit stop, it's Ramadan. It's where, for example, you've been running and running for justice, causing a headache for the Zionists in America, breaking their monopoly over the narrative. Thousands of Americans now changing their minds. Thousands of Brits changing their minds. Thousands of French changed their minds. But when you're really making an impact and everybody is seeing it, there is a reduction in content because everybody is resting. Because everybody says, no, I need to reflect now. These dunya affairs are not what I need to focus on during Ramadan. Ya ibadallah, Allah does not come down on this earth 1 month during the year. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ever present and He's always there. The gift of Ramadan is that you start to perceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why I tell people, don't make Ramadan the month of blessing for the oppressor. Don't make Ramadan the month of blessing for the wrongdoers. Don't make Ramadan the month of blessing for those who are slaughtering in Gaza, because suddenly Netanyahu feels like nobody's going to talk about Gaza anymore. Ibadallah, we keep moving during Ramadan. If the Prophet Muhammad tells you Badr is during Ramadan, we get up and we go. If Salahuddin Ayyubi tells you we're going to Jerusalem in Ramadan, we go. If the Quran comes down during Ramadan, Allah tells you go, we go. That's what Ramadan is. It's a reminder of the message to go. Think about it, Jalal. During Ramadan, we say we need to finish the Quran. It's not the Quran that you need to finish. It's the reconnection with the Quran. You're not finishing the Quran. You are opening the Quran and letting it speak to you. When it says to you, Ya ayyuhal muddathir qum fa'andhir. Oh, you who are covered at home. You who are covered with a blanket. You who are covered and sitting. It's talking to the Prophet ﷺ, but it's talking to you. Oh, you who are covered. Don't read it, qum fa'andhir. Oh, mashallah. Allah says, stand and convey. Allah means read the Quran. When Allah speaks to you in it, قُمْ فَأَنذَرْ, then قُمْ فَأَنذَرْ, get up and say something. As soon as you read the ayah, get up and say something. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you get to the page where Allah says, وَمَنْ أَرَادَ الْآخِرَةَ وَسَعَى لَهَا سَعْيًا وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ فَأُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ سَعْيُهُمْ مَشْكُورًا. Those who strive for the sake of Allah and they strive believing in the promise of Allah, Allah says their striving is rewarded. Don't just zoom past it like you've just read an ayah. The Quran is speaking to you. Allah has given you a chance to read it. Get up and strive. Pause on that ayah. Get up and say, what can I strive in? That's the point of reading Quran during Ramadan. It's not for you to finish it. It's for you to speak with it. It's not for you to finish it. It's for you to reconnect with it. It's not for you to finish it. It's for you to remind yourself that there are commands that Allah gave you in the Quran, so you keep going. What are you going to be reading the Quran during Ramadan? You're going to read the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, not as a story that is a kumbaya story. You're going to be reading Surah Yusuf and you're going to see that he's betrayed by 11 Arab states, betrayed by 11 brothers, and that he's thrown in a well and he's abandoned by them. And the nicest of those Arabs, the nicest of those brothers says, let's not kill him, let's just throw him in a well. And you will read how Yusuf alayhi salam is thrown in the well. And you're going to read how he's pulled out of the well, but sold into slavery. And then you're going to read how in slavery, he's put in a position where he's told, commit a major sin or go to prison. And he says, if this is the choice between a rock and a hard place, khalas, I'll go to the prison. And he goes to prison and he stays there many years and he's forgot. That's what the Quran is not telling you. This is what happened to Yusuf. The Quran is telling you, Ya ibadallah, do you not see the parallel in your life? How we go from genocide to Gaza phase 1 to Gaza phase 2 to Arab states not this, to being put in prison over some international peace board and the like, until you get to the ending of it. Allah says, read on, it's Ramadan. Read on, it's Ramadan. See what happens. And you start reading and Yusuf alayhi salam comes out Al-Aziz, and all of the Arabs, all of the brothers are standing before him and they are asking him to forgive them for the way that they abandoned. Read it. When you get to Surah Nuh alayhi salam, don't just read it and say, yeah, tick, I read Surah Nuh. Talk to the Quran, let it speak to you. When Nuh alayhi salam says, Rabbi inni da'awtu qawmi layla wa nahara, falam yazidhum du'ai illa firara. Hear Nuh when he says it and see the resonance with those who are saying it around you. When you read it, don't read it like you are reading it like some sort of text. And you're like, okay, I'm ticking it. Read it and say, hang on a second here, Nuh, this is how I feel. Allahumma, this is how I feel. And go through it as you realize you are like Nuh alayhi salam. That's the point of the Quran. It's not rest, it's reset. It's I see myself here. When you get to Lut alayhi salam's story, and you get to the point where he says, قَالَ لَوْ أَنِّ لِي بِكُمْ قُوَّةً أَوْ آوِي إِلَى رُكُنٍ شَدِيدٍ. If only I had power or a powerful ally to resist my oppressors. Don't just read it, don't listen to Shuraim or Al-Afasi or these other people. Stop there for a second and say, oh my goodness, it's like the Quran knows my heart. Oh my goodness, it's like the Quran is speaking to me. Quran, how did you know this is what I feel? Quran, how did you know this is what I'm feeling? And let the Quran tell you, read on, ya ibadallah. Read on, I have a beautiful ending for you about how Allah's victory came true. Read Surah Maryam when you get to it. Don't read it like you're just rushing through it. No, stop. Listen to Zakaria. إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ نِدَاءً خَفِيًّا. He called on Allah, نِدَاءً خَفِيًّا. It's almost saying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, Rabbi inni wahana al-'azmu minni, washta'ala al-ra'su shayba. Allahumma, my bones have become old and my hair has become white. وَلَمْ أَكُنْ بِدُعَائِكَ رَبِّكَ شَقِيًّا. And Allahumma, I only have my dua for you. You asked about dua. I only have the dua that I can call you on. وَإِنِّي خِفْتُ الْمَوَالِيَ مِنْ وَرَائِي وَكَانَتْ امْرَأَتِي عَاقِرًا. And I am scared, Ya Rabbi subhanahu, about those who come after me, about the legacy I leave behind, about somebody to convey the message after me. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to him afterwards. And Zakaria is unsure about Allah's promise because Allah says, we're going to give you Yahya. إِنَّا نُبَشِّرُكَ بِيَحْيَا. So, and then Zakaria says, how can I have a son when my wife is old? وَكَانَتْ امْرَأَتِي عَاقِرًا وَقَدْ بَلَغْتُ مِنَ الْكِبِرِ عِتِيًّا. And I have become old. When you read that part, you're not reading a random story. This is you saying to Allah, how can I liberate Palestine when all I can do is talk in a mic? How can I liberate Palestine when all we can do is do some production? How can I liberate Palestine when all I have is this? How can I liberate Sudan when all I can do is this? That's the meaning of it. Ya Rabbi, how can these great miracles happen when I am so limited? That's the point of Zakaria. How can I achieve these great miracles that you promise, Ya Rabb, when I am an old man with bones and my wife is old? What does Allah respond? قَالَ كَذَلِكَ قَالَ رَبُّكَ هُوَ عَلَيَّ هَيٍّ وَلِنَجْعَلَهُ آيَةً لِلنَّاسِ وَرَحْمَةً مِنَّا وَقَدْ خَلَقْتُكَ وَلَمْ تَكُ شَيْئًا. That we created and you are nothing. Allah says, هُوَ عَلَيَّ هَيٍّ. That it is easy for me. وَقَدْ خَلَقْتُكَ وَلَمْ تَكُ شَيْئًا. And did we not create you when you are nothing? See how Allah says it to Zakaria and how He says it to Maryam alayhi salam later when she says, how can I have a son? These aren't random stories, Ya Jalal. These are Quranic stories to tell us how we can move next, how we can keep going. When Allah tells you about those who came before us, مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَزُلْزِلُوا. Do you think you will not be tested like those who came before you? They were tried and tested, وَزُلْزِلُوا, shaken in their hearts, until they said, مَتَى نَصْرُ اللَّهِ. The Quran is saying to you, Ya Jalal, you know people before you said it as well. Ya Asya, people before you said it as well. Ya Jerry, people before you said it as well. Ya Sami, people before you said it as well. They said all these things, read it. You're supposed to stop and say, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I'm reading from the naysayers on Twitter. This is exactly what I'm reading the people are saying on Instagram. It's like this Quran has an answer. It's like this Quran knows what to do. It's like this Quran knows how things are going to pan out. It's like this Quran, this magnificent story just repeats itself over and over again. Everybody says, set your goals for Ramadan. I'm going to finish the Quran. Why finish the Quran? Speak to the Quran and let it speak to you in its own way. Let the ayah resonate with you in its own way. Let Allah speak to you in this book, for the Quran was a miracle. Why? The Quran was a miracle because Allah removed an intermediary and Allah put His words in a book to speak to you directly. Allah said to you, وَإِن تُعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. If you were to count the blessings of Allah, you would never finish counting them. The point of Ramadan is not to rest. The point of Ramadan is to remind you we're stronger than we believe we are. We're stronger than we think we are. We're stronger than we give ourselves credit for, because our Lord is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the final point I'll say here is this. The reason Allah says reconnect with the Quran is look at what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through to deliver this Quran to you. Look at how much tests he went to deliver it to you, to save you 1400 years later from dhulumat and to bring you into the nur. Look how many people carried this book and carried this message in order to go and deliver it to you so that you might be guided. Look what they went through to deliver it to you. Look at the trials they went through to deliver it to you. They went through colonization. They went through defeats. They went through all of these various different, to deliver it to you. Are you the one who receives the book and says, I'm the generation that stops and does nothing? It's a chance. It's a chance for us to reset, not to rest. So why I say to people in Ramadan when they make the dua is, Ya ibadallah, remember this point. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ received the first wahi, he didn't receive the full Quran all in one go. He didn't receive it all in one go. The reason he didn't receive it all in one go is because he hadn't gone through the necessary experiences in order to understand the rest of the ayat. The point is, Ya ibadallah, it's not about finishing the Quran. It's about connecting with the Quran and letting it speak to you. And it's about reminding that in this world of evil and injustice, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still exists. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still there. The community is still there and you'll see them in Taraweeh. The community is still there, you'll gather with them for iftar. Your family still love you, you will sit with them in iftar. The one whose family is non-Muslim will go to the masjid and will find people sitting there inviting them for iftar. People will send invitations everywhere and saying, hang on a second, we do actually have a community. We do actually care about each other. We do actually come together. Is this what where have you been all year? Why is it I only see you during Ramadan? And you will realize the reason you only saw them during Ramadan is because you forgot the Quran. You didn't move. You didn't be concentrated in your taqwa. You forgot Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is saying during Ramadan, Ramadan is not about rest. Ramadan is about coming back to me. May Allah make us those who remember Him. May Allah allow us to keep moving. May Allah never make Ramadan a blessed month for the oppressors. May He never make it a blessed month for Netanyahu. May He never make it a blessed month for the wrongdoers. May Allah always let us be the thorn in the side of injustice. Even during Ramadan, we will not rest during Ramadan. We will keep moving as they did in Badr, as they did in Jerusalem with Salahuddin Ayyubi, as they did in Hittin, as they did in the revelation of the Quran that came down during Ramadan, as they did in Guatemala when they established Andalusia. The paramount of coexistence, the epitome of coexistence between the different religions. This is the heritage of Ramadan. Whoever said rest, may Allah forgive him, because I think a punishment is coming his way.
Amin ya Rabbi. Jazakallah khair, Sami Hamdi, for all your time today. Thank you so much.
Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum. Now you've reached the end of this show, and the fact that you've stayed until the very end tells me that you truly believe in our work. Please consider making a one-off donation or becoming a member by visiting thinkingmuslim.com/membership. Now your contributions give you exclusive behind-the-scenes access and the ability to ask questions to our guests, and monthly calls with myself, my team, and our guests like Sami Hamdi. Jazakallah khair, and keep us in your du'as.